Final Valley. The dark clouds loomed around the valley. Lightning and thunder rained as it showed the scars and destruction of a battle of fate. The battle between Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha over the Uchiha's future in either Konoha or Odo. Upon closer inspection, there was only one person on the field in an unconscious state. It was the very blonde who fought against Sasuke. A small trickle of light was on the face of the blonde shinobi. His clothes were little ripped pieces, and his body was covered in bruises from the fight. The most noticeable was the one on his chest like he'd been struck by something hard. Naruto laid in his unconscious state for a little longer, and before any more time passed, someone came to the ground and looked at the blonde with a mournful expression. "Naruto, you must have fought as hard as you could," the person said. They were wearing the standard Jonin vest for Konoha shinobi. They had white hair, and their headband was over their left eye with a small cloth covering their mouth. It was Kakashi Hatake, Jonin sensei to Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno, and Sasuke Uchiha. Kakashi looked at the damaged part of Naruto's skin and lifted the blonde into his arms. He flung Naruto over his back and shot off for Konoha, but not before looking back in the opposite direction. "Sasuke," Kakashi said to himself before sighing and running off. The white-haired shinobi knew he had to hurry. He could feel Naruto's heartbeat, and it was slowly stopping. "Come on, Naruto. Just last a little longer," Kakashi thought, and narrowed his left eye as he looked at the blonde's face. He could only hope that Naruto would be all right. Kakashi could only imagine if Naruto died. So many people would be sad, and maybe even Tsunade, their Hokage, would spiral into depression again. "Minato-sensei, what would you do if you were holding your son like this?" Kakashi asked in thought. He had no idea of what was happening with Naruto and how it would shape him to be who he always could be. Naruto's mind. Naruto laid in the emptiness of his mind. His unconscious state was visible to Kyuubi, and the fox grumbled at its container. He offered the blonde power, but he still lost, and his heart was giving out of him. The darkness around Kyuubi was growing more and more, making the Bijou curse. "Fading, it's fading. Am I going to die?" Kyuubi wondered, and before long, a white light appeared in front of him. The Kyuubi narrowed his eyes and growled at the newcomer, but quickly paled when he saw who it was. It was a white spirit with purple arms and a sword in its mouth. "So, the kid's finally dead, huh? I must say he was kind of lucky. The damn brat escaped me so many times it wasn't even funny," the figure said, and Kyuubi growled again. "Shinigami," Kyuubi said, and the white-haired figure turned to the Kyuubi. The Shinigami narrowed his eyes, then turned back to Naruto. He took out his sword and traced it over the blonde's form. "What's dead is dead. That means you're next, Kyuubi," the Shinigami said to him. He was about to slash at Naruto and rip the blonde's soul from his body, but turns out that fate was against even the Shinigami. "Sasuke," Naruto yelled immediately and shot up, dodging the blade from the Shinigami in one swift move. Kyuubi widened his eyes, and the Shinigami raised an eyebrow. This hadn't happened before in all the times the Death God did this. Kyuubi was at least surprised, if not anything else. "Damn it, brat. You sure know how to scare people. I thought I was going to die because of you for a second," Kyuubi said, and instantly Naruto turned his unwanted Bijou behind its cage. "Furball, what the hell happened?" Naruto asked, making the Kyuubi growl. His container was always a damn smart mouth. It really irritated the fox to no end, but that was a point for another time. "Dumb brat. In case you're blind, the Shinigami is right in front of you," Kyuubi said, and immediately Naruto turned his head to see the real thing in front of him. The blonde gulped while the Shinigami looked at him with its menacing glare. "Come on, brat. It's time to die," the Shinigami said, and Naruto immediately stopped paling, and his expression changed from one of fear to confusion. "But I'm not dead. Why are you here for me?" Naruto asked, and the Shinigami sighed. This was so much better when someone was actually dead and not all into questions. "Well, you'll be dead in a matter of seconds, so I might as well just stay here and wait for it. I swear, you humans fight over the simplest of things and die by the simplest of methods," the Shinigami said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes at the god. So fighting to save his friend was supposed to be a simple matter? Well, I don't care if you're the Shinigami or anything else, but I'm not dying till I become Hokage. Naruto yelled, making the Kyuubi grin at its container's disrespect to even the Shinigami. The spirit in question looked at the blonde impassively and sighed. How many people do you think have said that line? I've seen them all. I should just kill you right now, rather than wait for your heart to fail. The Jonin that's carrying you isn't going to make it. You're better off resigning to your fate right now, the Shinigami said, and Naruto stood to his feet, then proceeded to point at the death god. I don't care what you think. If I say I'm not dying, then I'm not dying. There are too many people counting on me, and I've got to save Sasuke. He might be an ass, but I'm going to bring him back, Naruto said, and the Shinigami rolled its eyes. Kyuubi simply remained silent and let its container talk it out with the Shinigami. You think you have a say in this? When you die, you will die. That's your final destiny. You will see me again if by the slim chance that you do survive this, which you won't. Face it, I'm taking you whether you like it or not, the Shinigami said, and Naruto allowed his blonde hair to cover his eyes. He crossed his fingers and glared at the Shinigami, making his conviction and determination clear in his eyes. Well, you're not taking me without a fight. I told you I won't die. Besides, I'm not so weak that I would lose against someone who babbles on about fate and destiny. I'll make it on my own. I'll decide when I die, and I'll decide my destiny. So if you think your pale, ghostly, stupid Oni mask-wearing face can tell me otherwise, then I dare you to try it, Naruto said, raring to go for a fight. Even if it was small to near non-existent, the Shinigami and Kyuubi found some respect for Naruto. No one had ever threatened the Shinigami before, so this was interesting. The Shinigami looked at the blonde, and then he drew his sword back. You really have a mouth, you know. I've got little to no tolerance for you humans and your stupidity, but you're by far the most interesting. No one has talked to me like that before, the Shinigami said, and Naruto took out a kunai from his back pouch. Kyuubi snickered, making the two turn to him. Please, Shinigami, if this brat can call the Hokage old lady, and even me, for a ball, then there's no way he's going to respect you that easily. Hell, I doubt he respects anyone, Kyuubi said, and Shinigami had to agree with him even if the death god didn't voice his agreement. Naruto pouted at Kyuubi's insult and huffed. Hey, I respect a lot of people, Naruto said, making Kyuubi roll his eyes while the Shinigami raised his own. I respect Hokage and all the Hokages, especially the Yondaime, Naruto said with a sense of pride. Kyuubi narrowed his eyes, and so did the Shinigami. Naruto looked at the two for a second before he looked confused. Did I say something wrong? Naruto asked. Kyuubi broke from its stupor, and so did the Shinigami. The death god wasn't sure, but it was getting off its original purpose. Well, anyway, Naruto Uzumaki, your heart's about to stop, so it's time to dash. I said no. I'm not dying before I become Hokage. Do what you want, but I'll beat you to a pulp if you try to stop me. Naruto said, thought in his head, he knew he was insane. This was the freaking Shinigami. He was lucky it didn't kill him already, and now he had more nerve to threaten the god. Either he was very brave or very stupid. Maybe it was both, the blonde wasn't sure. What makes you think you'll do anything? All you said are words. You humans always say one thing and mean the other. You're no different. Don't think I don't know you, brat. I know how your village treats you. I know everything about you from your birth to right now, so what can you do that would make me think that you're any different from any other human? The Shinigami asked. Naruto looked at the ground as he felt the stares of Kyuubi and the Shinigami on him. The blonde, for some reason, could feel his heart growing colder and colder. He was feeling dazed, and his vision was fading. You're beginning to fade, brat. In the next few seconds, I'll be taking your soul, the Shinigami said. Kyuubi looked at Naruto and wondered what the blonde was going to do. Naruto, in the meantime, looked at the kunai in his hand and gripped it tightly. Fine, the Shinigami wanted different, then Naruto could very well do different. The blonde raised the kunai in his hands and in a swift motion surprised the Kyuubi and Shinigami when he used it to pierce his chest. Naruto knew that no blood would come from it, but it showed his conviction well enough to the Shinigami, who was downright surprised. This is how I'm different. My heart is different. I never go back on my word, or I have nothing. That's my ninja way. Naruto yelled, and the Shinigami narrowed his eyes. If the blonde did that in his conscious state, then there would be no way that he would survive. It's like he just gave his soul to the Shinigami without actually handing it over. All you humans are so stupid, but you're probably the most interesting. Fine then. Out of interest, I'll let you live. It'll be worth it to see you and your promises, the Shinigami said as it used its sword and struck Naruto in the heart. The blonde gasped at the hit while the Kyuubi narrowed his eyes at the sight. A small light glowed on Naruto's right hand, and before long it settled down as the Shinigami slowly placed Naruto on the ground. What did you do to him? Kyuubi asked, and the Shinigami turned to the Bijou while putting its sword away. I'm going to keep an eye on him, maybe more than that. I've entered a summoning contract with him. Now I'll get to see how different he is from other humans, the Shinigami said, and Kyuubi widened his eyes while his tails thrashed the caged. But no one's been in a full contract with you. The only other contract was that life-wasting jutsu, the Shikifujin, and only a select few people knew that, Kyuubi said, and the Shinigami simply shrugged. It doesn't matter. I'll see how far this brat can handle if he's in a contract with me, the Shinigami said, then immediately disappeared. Kyuubi raised an eyebrow, then looked at its container. And people say I have a knack for causing trouble. The damn brat is a trouble magnet, Kyuubi said with a small chuckle before disappearing into the seal. Konoha hospital room. Naruto opened his eyes hazily and saw he was inside the hospital. The reason he could tell was because of the weird smell it had. Only a hospital could smell like this. The blonde sighed and rubbed his head. Was that a dream? Naruto wondered while rubbing his head. He immediately winced in pain as he touched his chest. It felt like it was slightly burning for a few minutes, but then it subsided, giving the blonde some peace. Naruto sighed and laid back on the admittedly comfy bed. He then widened his eyes when he saw a seal on his right hand. It wasn't over-complex, but the blonde never recognized it before. He could at least see that it was for a summoning contract, however, that was all he knew. That's this on my right hand. Naruto wondered, and immediately his tenant decided to make its presence known. Brat, you really are stubborn, you know that? To challenge the Shinigami is downright insane, Kyuubi said, and Naruto widened his eyes. It wasn't a dream. Him almost dying, his meet the Shinigami, him piercing his chest with a kunai. It was all real. That really happened, furball, Naruto said, making the Kyuubi groan. Yes, brat, it did happen, and needless to say, but you did something that almost no one ever did. You actually managed to get a contract with the Shinigami. What he sees in your ass, I don't know, Kyuubi said with a smirk. Naruto pouted at his Bijou, but did admit that he had a point. What did the Shinigami want with him anyway? Naruto's thoughts were soon interrupted by a knock on the door, and the blonde turned his attention to it. The door slid open, and Naruto saw Sakura appear through the doorway. The blonde immediately frowned and looked at his sheets. Hey Naruto, it's a nice day, let me open the shades for you, Sakura said to him. Naruto didn't say a word as Sakura opened the shades and the window, allowing a cool breeze to flow through. The breeze was a delight to the both of them despite the tense situation. How long was I out? Naruto asked her. Sakura looked out the window and gave him a small smile while her short hair flapped in the wind. At least 3 to 4 days. We thought you'd never wake up, but you and the others are going to be fine, Sakura said to him. Naruto looked at the sheets and couldn't help but frown a bit more. It was then that the blonde was brought out of his thoughts. Naruto, I dash. I'll bring him back, Sakura, Naruto suddenly said, interrupting Sakura, who gave a soft smile. She turned to Naruto, and with her finest smile, she tried to seem at least happy that he and the others were back alive. It's all right, Naruto. I'm going to train and get stronger so I don't leave you and Sasuke behind anymore. We'll get Sasuke-kun back together, she said, and Naruto grinned at that. The blonde immediately nodded in agreement with her and gave her a thumbs up. You got it, Sakura, Naruto said, and it was then that the pink-haired Kunoichi looked at the seal marking on his right hand. She stared at the marking for a bit before turning to Naruto. Hey Naruto, what's that seal on your right hand? Sakura asked. Naruto looked at his arm and immediately widened his eyes. He had forgotten about it for a second and quickly racked his brain about what to tell her. There was no way she would believe that it was from the Shinigami or that Naruto met the Shinigami at all. Amaro Sennin drew this for myself. It's supposed to be a good chakra storage seal, Naruto said, and Sakura gazed at the seal on his hand for a bit longer before nodding and walked off. All right then. I guess I'll see you later then, Sakura said to him. Naruto nodded with his usual smile and watched Sakura leave. Naruto sighed and looked at the seal on his hand. How do I even have this contract? I already have a contract with the Toads, and if I recall, it isn't possible to have two contracts at once, Naruto said, and Kyuubi nodded with his knowledge of that at least. That's true, Brat. I don't really know why that is, but since you have this contract, only two things can happen. Either you have both, or the Shinigami disbanded your contract with the Toads and made his own, Kyuubi said, and Naruto sighed again. He seemed to be doing that a lot today. All right, I guess I'll try it out, Naruto said and bit his thumb. He went through the required hand signs and slammed his right hand. Kuchios no Jutsu, Naruto yelled, and his right hand glowed slightly. It faded after a while, and Naruto looked around the room, but didn't see any sight of the Shinigami at all. Is this some kind of joke? Naruto asked while wondering if the Shinigami had a sense of humor. I don't take things lightly, nor do I have a sense of humor that I know of. I didn't expect you to summon me so fast, though, the Shinigami said from behind Naruto. The blonde gasped and immediately turned his head to see the death god right behind him. Naruto leaped out of the bed and pointed his finger at the god. Why you're here? I really have a contract with you. Naruto asked, and the Shinigami nodded. That's right. You're the first human to have a full contract with me. The only ones who had an imperfect contract with me were the Sandaime and Yondaime from your village. And I take it you have questions, so let's get them over with, the Shinigami said, and Naruto nodded before sitting back on his bed with his arms and legs crossed. I'm all right. Where did this contract come from? Naruto asked. The Shinigami sighed and pointed to Naruto's head. We were talking in your mind. Remember when I said you were the most interesting person to me? I take a general interest in things that are interesting to me, so I'm keeping an eye out for you, and what better way than a summon contract? The death god said, and Naruto nodded with him. All right, thanks, I guess. So does that mean that my contract with the Toads ended? Naruto asked his newest summon. The Shinigami shook its head and pulled out some beads that were on its hand. No, the contract I have with you is one that the other summons don't know about and never will. You can continue to use the Toads at your leisure, but our contract is more than that, the Shinigami said, and Naruto raised an eyebrow. Why? No, I mean how? Naruto asked, making the Shinigami chuckle slightly. As you know, I'm the Shinigami, the ruler over the living and the dead. If you summon me like the Yondaime or Sandaime did, then I would have to take your soul as compensation. But since you're my first summon, then I'm going to set the normal conditions. For now, you're only allowed to summon me twice a day. Second, whenever you summon me, I won't take your soul since we have a contract, the Shinigami told Naruto. All this information was burned into the blonde's mind, and he immediately agreed. He could only imagine if people thought he could summon the Shinigami. It would be mass chaos. The third condition is more to your benefit, depending on how you use it, the Shinigami said, and Naruto raised an eyebrow. He was getting excited, but that was to be expected of the first real summoner to the Shinigami. All right, so what is this final condition or benefit? Naruto asked in a hurry. The Shinigami sighed as it had to remember that it was dealing with a 13-year-old boy, so it wasn't abnormal that he would be excited, though the thought of being someone summoned was sort of interesting to the Shinigami, even if it didn't show it completely. All right, since you know I'm the Shinigami, it's sort of a benefit, if you could call it that. Since I rule the dead, you're allowed to bring people back to life if you want to, the Shinigami said, making Naruto widen his eyes and drop his jaw. He could nearly faint from that information. I can revive anyone I want. That's awesome, Databayo, Naruto said, forgetting his injuries and jumping up and down the room. The Shinigami sighed and its eyebrow twitched. I'm not done with it. This has two parts to it, so pay attention, the Shinigami said, and Naruto nodded, calming down enough to hear the rest of what the Shinigami had to say to him. While you can revive anyone you want, I still have to be the Shinigami, and just allowing you to bring back people would bring disorder to the realm of the dead. So on that note, for every person you revive, you must kill two people. One to fill the empty space, and the second as a sort of interest payment to me, the Shinigami told him. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the last part. But you're the Shinigami, why do you need more souls when you probably have millions of them already? Naruto asked, and the Shinigami nodded. It's like I said, it would cause disorder in the realm of the dead Naruto Uzumaki. Humans, animals, and other things going there is fine because when you die, I take you there, but leaving is a completely different matter. No one has ever left my realm, and for good reason that I can't go into right now. The Shinigami said, and Naruto nodding, feeling that some secrecy must have been needed. He wasn't really sure that he wanted to know the consequences. So anything else I need to know? Naruto asked, and the Shinigami stared at him for a second, most likely in thought rather than plain looking. He then focused on the blonde some more and nodded. Last thing is that people like the Sandame and Yondame who use the imperfect contract with me can't be revived no matter what. That's the price they pay for the using that jutsu. Their souls are held within this pot, right here to never be let out again. The Shinigami said, and Naruto looked at it in awe and slight sadness. And there was his admiration, the Yondame, and his surrogate grandfather, Sarutobi Hiruzen. The blonde felt so close to them, but so far away. It really made him sad, but for some reason, it wasn't as lasting as the blonde thought. All right, just one last question, Naruto said, and the Shinigami nodded at its summoner. All right, what is it? The Shinigami asked, and Naruto pointed to himself, making his summon raise an eyebrow. Why me? I mean, why did you choose me to be your summoner? Naruto asked, and the Shinigami had a chuckle. Maybe it was from Naruto's embarrassment of being the summoner to him, or for his own entertainment, the summon wasn't sure. I said it's because you interest me. You're the first person to threaten me of all beings. You're also the first person who had woken up before I could take your soul. Not to mention that even though it didn't hurt, you pierced your chest with that kunai to show how serious to me you were. I think that warrants enough of my interest in you. So like I said, I keep my eye on interesting things, and this is the best way, the Shinigami said, and Naruto nodded. His life just got better, he figured. All right, I think I understand everything. So I can only summon you twice a day. Unlike those with the imperfect contract, you won't take my soul if I do summon you, and I can revive anyone from the dead, so long as I pay back two people. Lastly, I can't bring those back who have used you in the imperfect contract, the Shiki Fujin thing that the furball was talking about, right? Naruto asked. The Shinigami nodded in a complete affirmative, and the blonde grinned. All right then. I don't know what I can do, but I will be a great summoner to you, Shinigami. Is there anything else I can call you? Do you have a name? Naruto asked. The Shinigami raised an eyebrow and shook his head. Naruto sighed and rubbed the back of his head while wincing at the pain in his body. Then I guess I'll call you Shin, which should be short for Shinigami. Is that all right? Naruto asked. The Shinigami shrugged it off and said it didn't matter to the death god at all. Naruto seemed okay with it and nodded. All right, then Shin it is, Naruto said, and the Shinigami began to fade. Oh, and just so you know, I recommend that you mix your attire slightly. You stick out too much in that orange thing, Shin said before Naruto gritted his teeth. Orange is cool, Naruto yelled, and immediately he turned to see next to him looking at him like he was insane. Who are you talking to, Gaki? A white-haired man asked. Naruto turned to him and blushed in embarrassment. Oh, I was thinking out loud, is all Ero Sennin. What are you doing here? Naruto asked, leaning up from his bed. The man gritted his teeth and pointed at the blonde. I'm not Ero Sennin. I'm the Toad Sage of Mount Mayaboku. The women swoon when they hear my name. I am Jiraiya, the Toad Sage. The man said, and Naruto sighed at his pervert teacher. He always was weird to the blonde, and he would never be any different, but Naruto went with it. Yeah, whatever, Ero Sennin. So what do you want again? Naruto asked him. Jiraiya pouted, then grumbled about young people and disrespect to their elders. But then he got serious. Fine, I'll make this quick then. You're going on a 2-year training trip with me. It's time I taught you more, and since you're in the village, I'm not around much. But it's a different story if I'm with you, Jiraiya said, and Naruto's eyes gleamed. He instantly smiled, but it lessened when he saw Jiraiya's serious face. But before you go, I'm going to tell you this now. Give up on Sasuke. He made his choice, and nothing will change that. He's a traitor who hurt his friends, his comrades, and went to Orochimaru for power. If you pursue Sasuke, then you're only doing a fool's errand, Jiraiya said, and Naruto looked at the sheets. The blonde narrowed his eyes, and he looked at the seal on his right hand. He then touched the seal on his stomach and grinned. Well then, I'll take the fool's errand. To either be wise and have no friends, or be a fool with lots of friends, I'll be the fool my entire life. I'll do amazing things on my own. I know Shin will help me, Naruto said, making Jiraiya raise an eyebrow while the blonde cursed. Who's Shin? Jiraiya asked, and Naruto gulped for a second. Sorry, different thought, but you get my point. I'm completely serious, Naruto said, and Jiraiya sighed while jumping off the window ledge. The thought of an idiot like you trying to do things on his own is downright stupid, and I'll be lucky if you don't meet the Shinigami too early, Jiraiya said. Naruto chuckled hesitantly while he looked at his right hand. You've got no idea, Arrow Sennin, Naruto thought with a grin. If you're this set on being a fool, then I'll just make sure you have the tools to make this foolish errand. Pack your things. We've got things to take care of right now, Jiraiya said, then shined out the window. Naruto stayed in his bed and grinned. He laid his head on the pillow and looked back at the seal on his right hand. The first Shinigami summoner. How cool is that databeo? Naruto thought, and before long he went to sleep. It was then that the Shinigami, Shin, appeared and looked at his blonde summoner. Hee, a fool's errand, huh? Well, the fools are the most interesting. Looks like I'll get to see something really good, Shin said before finally disappearing. Naruto had no idea what was in store with him and his life. 1 week later, Naruto was finally released from the hospital with Tsunade's approval and immediately went to his apartment. Jiraiya told him that they would be leaving the next day, so that would be enough time for Naruto to tie up any loose ends he had. The blonde had said goodbye to all his friends in that week and told them that he would get stronger in no time. Everyone seemed sad about Naruto leaving, especially Hinata, but they knew that they would see him again. Currently, Naruto was packing his bags full of essentials for his trip, but if one looked close enough, they would see that the blonde wasn't entirely focused on packing, but more or less what he could do as the Shinigami summoner. Those conditions that Naruto knew about had occupied his mind for that entire week. He thought about all the good it could do him to revive people as well as have someone as powerful as the Shinigami. The blonde knew, however, that this was a delicate situation. He might have been dumb and clueless at times, but he was far from stupid. He knew that something like this would be impossible to explain to anyone, especially Tsunade and Jiraiya. If word found out about this, then there would be so many problems that it wasn't even funny. The blonde imagined all the happy faces people would have from loved ones and things like that. But what would they do if he said no to them? Would they force him to do it? Would he be deemed a traitor for him helping his village? Aren't you overthinking this a bit? His tenant asked, making its presence known. Naruto broke from his thought and continued packing. It wasn't like he wanted to overthink something like this, but the whole situation made it that way. It's not that I guess. I've just never felt so responsible before. This is heavy furball. I guess I'm glad that Shin's interested in me, but I can only wonder about the good I can do with him, Naruto said, and Kyuubi allowed its tails to thrash around for a bit out of boredom. If it was me, I'd immediately just revive the closet thing to me and kill all of you for compensation, Kyuubi said with a sly grin. Naruto narrowed his eyes and looked up at the ceiling. And that's why you're stuck in there in the first place, Naruto said, bringing Kyuubi's mood down and making the fox growl at him. The blonde chuckled at his tenant and looked at his room. His lonely room that hadn't been in the best of shape. He always tried to keep it clean, but he had always been training, so there wasn't much of a full use for it besides sleep. It was then that Naruto remembered when Shin said that he could revive anyone, and at the time, Naruto immediately thought about his parents. They were the first thing that popped in his head when he heard that. He wondered what it would be like to see his mother, his father, to hold them and see their smiles on his face, but he wondered if he were disrespecting them by wanting to that wish. He also wondered what it would be like for others. how Gaara and his siblings would feel, Hinata and her mother, Niji and his father, even Sasuke and his family. He could just see Sasuke shocked at the thought of his parents being alive. It all sounded like a good idea, but then there was the second part of the condition. He had to kill 2 people for every 1 person he revived. One to fill the void of the revived soul, and the second as a payment to the Shinigami. Don't tell me you're scared of killing someone, Brad. In your line of work, the fact that you haven't really killed anyone yet is amazing. Time to grow up and see how the world works, Brad, QB said, and Naruto looked to the ground. He wanted to argue that against QB, but he knew that the fur ball was right. Naruto didn't have the experience that went with killing someone. He had seen deaths before that ranged from Haku and Zabuza to his Gigi. It wasn't a pleasant experience, and the thought of Naruto doing that was felt ridiculous. I suppose, Naruto said as he finished the last of his packing and got to his bed. He put on his pajamas and went to sleep, leaving his thoughts behind for the next morning. Next morning, Naruto groggily woke up and rubbed his eyes from the intense sunlight. The blonde yawned and got out of bed. It was a terrible night. He barely got any sleep at all. The blonde had been thinking all night, but now was the time to get ready. Naruto got to his feet and quickly took a shower. He felt revived from a feeling of hot water on his body and watched it trickle down his form. His spiky hair fell down and covered his face while the blonde leaned on the wall. He stayed in the shower for about 20 minutes before getting out and wrapping a towel over his waist. He came up to his closet and saw the last of his orange jumpsuit and snorted. "Why do you have to tell me to change my attire? I like orange," Naruto said to himself, and QB rolled his eyes at his container. "Are you kidding? You stick out like a sore thumb in that thing. I'll admit that orange goes well with certain colors, but it's not good being the dominant color." Shinigami nailed it right on the head, QB said, making Naruto growl. The whole world was against him wearing orange. It wasn't that bad of a color, was it? Naruto sighed and decided to put on his signature jumpsuit and grab his bag, scrolls, and ninja tools for his trip with Jiraiya. He was excited at the thought of getting stronger. He really wanted to bring Sasuke back to Konoha, but the blonde knew that he had his own dreams and ambitions. That wouldn't change for him. He would be more than happy to bring the Uchiha back to his village, but he wouldn't obsess over it. He wouldn't be like Sasuke and have a simple one-track mind. Having grabbed all of his things, Naruto closed the door to his apartment, which wouldn't be open for the next 2 years, and walked down the stairs. He quickly made it to the streets of Konoha and looked at the various people bustling around. He looked at all the sights and took them to memory, since he knew he wouldn't be back for a bit. "I'm gonna miss this place," Naruto said, coming up to the gates of Konoha. The blonde saw Jiraiya waiting for him near the gates along with Tsunade, Shizune, and Kakashi. "Good morning," Naruto said, and Jiraiya leaned up from the wall his was leaning against. "Gaki, you're early," Jiraiya said, and Naruto shrugged his shoulders. He figured that they should just go and get walking. There was no more use in staying in Konoha anymore, so he just decided to follow Jiraiya out of the village. "Yeah, I guess I'm just excited," Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head. Jiraiya chuckled with a nod, while Shizune and Kakashi grinned. Tsunade walked up to Naruto and placed her hand on his shoulder. "Come back, Brat. It's going to be boring without you," Tsunade said, and before Naruto could respond, she grabbed him into a fierce but kind hug. Naruto hugged her back and stepped away. "I will, Tsunade-bachan. Just keep that Hokage seat warm for me until I get back," Naruto said, making Tsunade's eyebrow twitch. She proceeded to grab his cheeks and squeeze them hard. "You really have a mouth, you know that," Tsunade said while Naruto yelled out in pain. She finally let go, and Naruto rubbed his cheek while sticking his tongue out at her. Tsunade glared at Naruto and simply waved it off. She had no idea what made her think she would miss Naruto, but the truth was that she would. She really couldn't wait till he got back. It would be amazing to see how much he would grow. "Take care, Naruto-kun," Shizune said, giving Naruto a softer hug. Naruto grinned with a nod and came up to Kakashi. The Jonin was still reading his book, but patted Naruto on the shoulder. "You're not a kid anymore, Naruto. Come back stronger than you are now," Jiraiya said to him and lowered his book, which showed an eye smile to the blonde. Naruto nodded and was about ready to go. He turned to Jiraiya, and the toad sage smiled at him. Come on, Naruto. We got to get moving, Jiraiya said before Naruto raised an eyebrow. I thought you said I was early, Naruto said, and Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders. No use spending time here. I already have our first destination in mind, so let's go. We've got a lot of ground to cover, Jiraiya said, walking past the gates. Naruto nodded, and immediately the two set off away from the village. Naruto turned back to look at Konoha one last time and sighed before moving back with Jiraiya. He's going to be a headache when he gets back, Tsunade said, and Kakashi had to nod in agreement with her. Shizen merely smiled and walked back to the Hokage mansion. Tsunade walked back with her, and Kakashi shined out of sight to take care of some other business that he had to deal with. With Jiraiya and Naruto, the master and student duo had been walking for a while now, but much to Jiraiya's surprise, the trip was relatively quiet for the most part. Sure, they just started and weren't that far from the village, but he thought Naruto would be bugging the hell out of him with what he would be learning. However, as luck would or wouldn't have it, Naruto was in some deep thought that obviously continued from last night. He wondered about some of the issues that would revolve his life, and while he seemed to like the positive, he wasn't blind to the reality that things could go to hell for him. Naruto still seemed to be off in his own little world. He wasn't even really paying attention to where he was going. Jiraiya had never pegged Naruto for a deep thinker about anything, so this was entirely new to him. Hey brat, we've been traveling for 20 minutes, and you haven't said a word the entire time. What's the matter with you? Jiraiya asked, and immediately Naruto snapped from his thoughts. He hadn't realized that he was thinking so much. Oh, sorry, Ero-Sennin, just thinking about this training that you're going to have me do. I'm going to learn some killer techniques, right? Naruto asked, making Jiraiya sigh. So that's what it was, or so he believed. Always training with you, eh? Of course I'm going to teach you something good, but not today. We'll begin first thing tomorrow. You'd better be prepared, brat, Jiraiya said, and Naruto's eyes gleamed in excitement. He could only imagine the great things that he would be able to do after his training was complete. Soon silence reigned with the two again, and Naruto looked at the ground. He seemed confused, or rather uncertain of something. The blonde looked up and turned to his teacher for the next 2 years. Ero-Sennin, what was your first kill like? Naruto asked, making the toad sage narrow his eyes at the unusual question. Naruto already was unusual, but to add that question made him even more unusual. Jiraiya turned to see the blonde looking at the ground before he looked back up at the road in front of him. What's with this question? It's not like Yugaki, Jiraiya said, getting a little worried. Naruto rubbed the back of his head and softly smiled, but the look in his eyes told Jiraiya that the blonde was contemplating something. I guess it's curiosity. Sorry for being weird about it. I just wanted to know how you dealt with it. I wonder if you'll have me fighting bandits or something, so I just thought I'd be prepared for whatever, Naruto said, and while Jiraiya could see the small logic in Naruto's thinking, he was still concerned, though, against his better judgment, he decided to tell Naruto. For me, it didn't go well. I really thought low of myself to kill someone. It was back when I was a genin like you. I cried and cursed myself. I even stopped eating for about 5 days. Luckily, Sarutobi-sensei and Tsunade helped me deal. Orochimaru tried, but he wasn't the comforting type, but he told me in his own way. They just reminded me that this was a part of my job, and it came with the responsibility. As long as I don't find the joy in it, then I'm still human, Jiraiya said, and Naruto nodded like he had just affirmed something for himself. Jiraiya saw the small smile on Naruto's face, and the sight of it made the man's heart lighten a little. He then spotted the seal on Naruto's right hand and gazed at it. It looked very complex and powerful. Even he, with all his knowledge on Fuinjutsu, didn't know what type of seal it was. Hey Naruto, what's that seal on your hand? Jiraiya asked. Naruto mentally gulped and cursed that he didn't have the common sense to try and hide the damn thing. Of course, people would ask him where he got something like this. Who wouldn't? Even Sakura asked what it was, and she normally didn't take any interest in what Naruto did. The blonde looked at his seal, his connect to the Shinigami, the god of death. Oh, this is a storage seal that someone made for me. They said that it could help me with my training. It's supposed to keep my other chakra from getting too wild and allowing me to control it better, Naruto said, hoping that was enough to get by. Jiraiya looked at the blonde intently, and Naruto tried his hardest to look calm so that Jiraiya would buy it. He mentally gulped and was about to break down, but luckily for him, Jiraiya stopped and turned to the road. That's one nicely made seal. For me to not even know, it must be something good. What we'll see about during your training, Jiraiya said, and Naruto accepted that. He could pass this off, but it made the blonde burn into his mind that he needed to get his right hand covered. It didn't matter with what, but it just needed to be covered at the moment. Close call, huh, Brad? QB asked, snickering since he watched the scene in front of his container's eyes. He could almost laugh his heart out when he saw that. Meanwhile, Naruto grumbled at his tenant. That wasn't funny, furball. I thought I was going to get found out for a second. Man, that was scary, Naruto said, mentally making QB giggle. So are you finally going to stop acting like a wimp and kill somebody, or are you still worried about that? QB asked, and Naruto looked at the ground. He wasn't sure if he was still all right with killing someone, but for his parents he would do anything. He was sure that he would have a tough time dealing with it, but he was sure that he could work it out. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He never backed down. Sure, he was unsure about it, but he thought it would be right. He could only hope that when his parents were brought back, then they would feel the same way. He then widened his eyes and looked at Jiraiya with a sigh. Ero-senin, do you think we could go shopping also? I need some new clothes, Naruto said, and Jiraiya stopped walking. Naruto stopped a bit in front of him and raised an eyebrow. Ero-senin, Naruto asked, and immediately the blonde was brought into a hug. I knew you weren't a lost cause, kid. You're damn right we'll go shopping and get you out of that damn orange monstrosity you call clothing. I can't believe you finally see the light, Jiraiya said, crying, and Naruto's sweat dropped. Oh, come on. Was orange really that bad that Jiraiya had to cry tears of joy that Naruto was changing his attire? I still want some orange in it. No matter what you think, orange is cool and I like it, Naruto yelled, and Jiraiya sighed before setting the blonde down. Deal, kid. This might be a good trip after all. Let's hurry. The first town is still quite a ways away. We'll be there by nightfall if we hurry, Jiraiya said, picking up the pace. Naruto nodded and ran after his sensei with a simple smile on his face. Oh, Tafuka guy, homely woman town. Naruto and Jiraiya had just made it to their first stop for the day. It was the same town where Naruto had met Itachi for the first time. It still brought back memories of the time he saw Sasuke get crushed by his brother like the Uchiha was nothing to him. It was that same Itachi who killed his entire clan and made Sasuke the person he was, even though Sasuke had a part in that himself. The sun was still high in the sky for Naruto, so they were still making some good time. He wondered why Jiraiya wanted to stop here, but he got his answer when he saw Jiraiya's perverse giggling while he dashed off to the nearest brothel he could find, leaving Naruto to his own devices. Perverted old man, Naruto said in thought. Immediately after registering them, Jiraiya shot off. It was a sad day to be the apprentice of the Toad Sage for Naruto Uzumaki. Having placed his things on the floor next to his bed, Naruto got up and stretched his legs for a bit. He had been walking for quite a while, and his feet were killing him, but he did have other things on his mind at the moment. Naruto looked at the seal on his right hand and sighed. It really wasn't that simple after all, was it? Sigh. Even if I do call the Shinigami from my parents, I doubt he knows them specifically from all the souls he has. The only ones who probably even have a hint about it are Tsunade-ba-chan, since she's the Hokage, and possibly Ero-senin, since he knows just about everything that goes on in Konoha. Man, I should have asked Tsunade-ba-chan about it before we left. I wouldn't have put it past Gigi to know who my parents were also. I wonder why they won't tell me. Granted, I never really asked, but still, Naruto thought. He knew nothing about his mother or father other than the fact that they lived in Konoha and that they love him a lot. He didn't know if they were shinobi or civilian. He knew next to nothing, but that's why he was so excited. To get to know his parents, what child didn't want that? Would you stop complaining and do it already? Man, you can't make up your damn mind. I would do it in a heartbeat, QB said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes. I don't know anything about them. How do I know if Shin can bring them back if I'm not specific? Naruto asked, and the QB sighed. So ask him. He said you could summon him twice a day, so do it. Man, you're so damn irritating with your whole, I want my parents back, but killing people is bothering me thing, QB said, and Naruto sighed. Well, sorry for not being a heartless fox demon that could kill everyone in a matter of seconds, Naruto said, and QB snarled. You better be lucky I'm in this cage, brat, or I'd kill you where you stood. QB spoke, making Naruto roll his eyes. Whatever, furball, Naruto said before the two cut their argument short. The blonde bit his left thumb and traced the blood across the seal. Kuchios no jutsu, Naruto yelled out, and immediately the light shined again, making the blonde cover his eyes from the light. Naruto looked around for his summon again, but didn't see him. He was about to curse, but then remembered the last time. Naruto quickly turned around and grinned when he saw Shin right behind him like he thought. You're not sneaking up on me this time, Naruto said, and the Shinigami looked at the blonde with its gazing stare on him. Well, you certainly picked an interesting time to summon me. Now you can only summon me one more time for today, so what do you want? Shin asked with his arms folded. What's wrong with you? Naruto asked, and Shin sighed. He really had nothing wrong with him, and he didn't mind being summoned by Naruto in the least. Sorry, I've really got no reason. Maybe it's that I don't like being summoned for just a casual conversation, the Shinigami said to the blonde. Naruto nodded and stood to his feet and rubbed the back of his head. It's not for casual conversation, Shin. I actually have a question about the resurrection thing that you said I could do, Naruto told him. Shin raised an eyebrow and nodded while waiting for his summoner to tell him what it was. All right, what do you want to know? The Shinigami asked. Naruto nodded and looked at the ground for a second before turning back to the Shinigami. And when I ask for you to revive someone, do I have to be specific? I figured that with all the souls you have, then you wouldn't know who I wanted if I just asked, Naruto said, and the Shinigami nodded. That was a good question that Naruto asked as far as the Shinigami knew, and who was he to deny his summoner an answer? Well, I can keep track of all the souls, but if you want someone specific, then a name does help my search, just in the very slim chance that I get it wrong, also some defining characteristics. But names are generally all right, Shin said, and Naruto knew it and cursed. He didn't know either of his parents' names, and that infuriated the blonde, but at least Shin told him so he could do the appropriate thing. All right, if I ask you to revive someone, then how long will I have to kill the two required people? Naruto asked. The Shinigami looked at him and raised an eyebrow before it thought over his question. At the most, you have one of your human weeks. You only get 1 week, and if I don't have the two, then I'll take the soul back. On the chance that you have one kill, but not the other, then you have a week and a half. So if you kill one person of the two, but couldn't deliver the other to me, then you get an extra 4 days, QB said, and Naruto widened his eyes. So he could do it that way. All right, thank you, Shin. I'll summon you if I have anything else, Naruto said, and the Shinigami nodded, then began to fade into nothingness, leaving Naruto all alone in the room. Well, almost alone. Are you happy now? Sheesh. Now get that toad sage to tell you about your parents. It's like you said, he's a Sannin, so he should know about you if he's willing to train you. There is no doubt that he knows who your parents are, QB said, and Naruto nodded in agreement with his bijou for once in his life. I suppose you're right. Guess I'll just have to ask him straight out and hope for the best. I'll get him to talk, Naruto said with a grin while QB rolled his eyes. He had such a weird container. Nighttime. Naruto sighed as he waited for Jiraiya. The damn guy was taking so fucking long to get back. Could he really spend that much time at a brothel and not come back? He must have been fucking broke by now. In all that time, Naruto was busy thinking about his parents the whole time. He had even tried to do the Rasengan with one hand instead of the clone, since using a clone took too much time and he would need every second that he could use in a fight for his life. He had only a little success with it. He had left earlier to buy balloons for help, but that it was harder than he thought. He remembered when Jiraiya only did it with one hand. He didn't even use his other, had to handle the rotation of it. He really had mastered the Rasengan, even if he was a good-for-nothing pervert. Naruto was currently working on his leaf exercise for the time being. He was actually making a new record for himself. He really didn't like this patient type of thing, but if he was going to get stronger, then he would need to have better chakra control. However, it didn't take long for Naruto's concentration to be interrupted by the turning of a lock by a key, and the blonde turned to see Jiraiya coming through the door completely drunk. The blonde's sweat dropped as he watched Jiraiya giggle. Hehehe brat. Man, that hick girl was wonderful. You need a girl, Naruto, or you'll be a hick virgin for the rest of you hick life, he. Jiraiya said with his voice completely slurred. Naruto sighed and stood to his feet. Man, you're drunk. I guess I'm not getting anything out of you today. Damn it, Kami hates me, Naruto said, grabbing Jiraiya. Hold it, brat. Kami might actually like you. I tell you, drunk people are open like a book. Try getting out of him now. I doubt he'd remember it tomorrow anyway. Just try, and if it doesn't work, then you'll just have to try something else, Kyuubi said, and Naruto squinted his face. Isn't that kind of taking advantage of him? Naruto asked, and Kyuubi held up one of his claws. Well, when you're a shinobi, you're supposed to take advantage of others' weaknesses. Second, I will give you a certain list. Your money, your time, your patience, no matter how little it is, and even though you didn't ask him, your parents. I think he's taken advantage of you enough, Kyuubi said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes. He really hated it when Kyuubi had his points. He knew he was right, and while Naruto wanted to disagree with that, he very well knew he couldn't. All right, fine. I doubt this will work, but I'll try, Naruto said, and Kyuubi nodded with a sly grin for its container. It's about time he started to show some talent as a shinobi. Naruto sighed and huffed as he trudged Jiraiya towards his bed. He told Sage was fucking heavy, but Naruto wasn't about to complain. He knew Kyuubi was right. He was a shinobi, and to get information you had to do things that you didn't want to, and this was one of them. Naruto sat Jiraiya on the bed and backed away from him. Jiraiya looked completely buzzed that it made Naruto wonder if this would even work at all. Ero Sennin, who are my parents? Naruto asked him. It was short, sweet, and to the point. No beating around the bush at all for Naruto. Jiraiya giggled a little more for a few seconds and leaned up on the bed. He wouldn't you like to hick no kid. I'll tell you, Minato and Kushina really broke the mold when they had you, Jiraiya said to him. Naruto widened his eyes when he heard their names. Minato and Kushina. Their names sounded so nice and very cool to Naruto. The blonde gulped and continued his actions. Who were they? Naruto asked, and Jiraiya leaned his head to the wall. Are you kidding, kid? Minato Namikaze was considered a genius shinobi. He was the Yondaime Hokage after all, Jiraiya said, talking about his student. Naruto's eyes shot open, and the blonde dropped his jaw. His father was the Yondaime? The man he respected all his life was the one who put the Kyuubi inside him? And Kushina Uzumaki, she was such a firecracker. I tell you, Hick, sometimes I wondered who wore the pants in that relationship. She was a beauty, however. Nice long red hair, a slight tomboyish attitude, but still caring. The way she handled sword was also amazing. It still makes me chuckle when I remember that she was called the Red Hick Death. Quite the looker she was. When she was younger, she had to beat some of the guys with a stick to stop asking her out. She was also unique in many ways. Her chakra was so amazing. She could use her chakra like chains. It was amazing, Jiraiya said, and immediately Naruto was interested. The way Jiraiya talked, it was like his mother was drop-dead gorgeous. He was, however, sad that he couldn't bring back his father. He remembered when Shin told him that he couldn't be brought back since he had used the Shiki Fujin technique. Naruto would have really liked to see his father, to talk with him and his mother, to maybe punch his father in the face or his stomach for sealing the Kyuubi inside him, but he was just happy that he got to learn about them. Did they really love me? Naruto asked the drunken Jiraiya. The Toad Sage chuckled and looked at Naruto while patting him on the shoulder. Kid, they really did love you. When Minato wanted to make you a Jinchuriki, you should have seen Kushina's reaction. She went ballistic on him. Though why I know. She was the Kyuubi's previous Jinchuriki, Jiraiya said, and Naruto gasped. His mother was the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi before him? Did you know about that? Naruto asked. Kyuubi snorted and rolled his eyes. Pleased with how tight they made that damn seal, I didn't know anything. I had no idea who I was trapped inside. It could have been anybody for all I know, Kyuubi said, and Naruto sighed. All right, Iro-senin. Even though you're drunk, thanks for telling me. I doubt you'll remember this talk, Naruto said as he got up and left the room and turned out the light. Jiraiya giggled a little more, but before long that giggle dropped and Jiraiya gave a small smile along with softened eyes. I guess I played that off quite well. I didn't really want to tell him this early, but I guess he could at least know them. He's at least strong enough for now, and he's with me. I can only hope that he learns to keep his mouth shut about his family. Kami only knows what would happen if he starts talking, Jiraiya said to himself with a smile, his sober face looking more and more gentle as he looked at the moon. I'm sure you two would have wanted him to know also. I can only hope that he's good for training tomorrow, Jiraiya said before changing out of his clothes and going to sleep in his bed. With Naruto walked the streets of town and went over all that Jiraiya told him. He kept thinking back to his father and mother. The greatest Hokage of Konoha and the best Kenjutsu user of Konoha were both his parents. It was a lot to take in for the blonde. He wasn't sure whether to be happy or sad. Happy that his mother could be revived, happy that he knew his family, and happy that they loved him, but sad that his father was gone for good. He sealed the Kyuubi inside him, and he hadn't been told about them until just now. You know, Kyuubi, I'm confused right now, Naruto said, and Kyuubi sighed. It knew that this was to be expected from just hearing what Naruto had just heard, so maybe it was like that. I suppose I can understand, but you'd better be happy, brat. Sheesh, just revive the woman already. No doubt she wants to see you too, Kyuubi said, and Naruto nodded in agreement with that. I suppose you're right. Yeah, I can only hope she's not mad at me for what I'm about to do, Naruto said and ran off from the town and deep into the woods. He still wasn't sure about the payment for his mother and her soul, but he'd do it. On that he knew that he would. He promised himself that he would. Naruto came into a secluded spot of the forest and looked around. Kyuubi told him that no one was there and he was all right, which had the blonde confused. Why are you helping me so much? Until a week ago, we hated each other, Naruto said, and Kyuubi scoffed at his container. Don't assume anything, brat, or get sentimental on me. I don't know why I'm helping you either. Maybe I'm just bored and need something interesting to happen, Kyuubi said, making sure Naruto understood. The blonde could only chuckle at his tenant and nodded with his usual grin. You mean a lot to me too, furball, Naruto said, and Kyuubi huffed. Whatever, brat, Kyuubi responded, and Naruto bit his left thumb. This was the last time he could summon the Shinigami, so he had to make it count this time. Naruto traced his blood over the seal and yelled. Kuchios no Jutsu. Naruto yelled out, and the same blinding light made Naruto cover his eyes, and he immediately turned around to see Shin right behind him, as always. 2 times in one day. I didn't think you'd need me this much already. All right, what do you want now? The Shinigami asked. Naruto gulped and felt nervous. He had never done this before, so it was all new to him. Shin, I want to revive someone, Naruto said, and the Shinigami raised an eyebrow. He took his sword out of his mouth and took the purplish beads in his hands and gripped them. Wow, already? All right, I was expecting it much sooner. You are aware of the terms to our contract, right? Shin asked, and Naruto immediately nodded that he was more than aware of what he was getting himself into. He wanted to see his mother, and he wanted her to see him. He was still nervous, but his resolve was absolute. For every person I want you to revive, I must kill 2 people. One to fill the revived person's space, and the next as compensation to you, Naruto said, and the Shinigami nodded, glad that the blonde fully understood. Good. You have 1 week to honor your side of the contract, the Shinigami said, and Naruto immediately nodded. The Shinigami pressed his beads together and rubbed them with his hands. Naruto watched him go through the process, and so did Kyuubi. The Shinigami drew his sword and wrapped it in the beads. Who would you like to bring back from the dead? The Shinigami asked. Naruto gulped again, but he quickly nodded and balled his fists. My mother, Kushina Uzumaki, the woman with vibrant red hair, also known as the Red Death, Naruto said, and the Shinigami nodded. His eyes glowed a white light, and his sword glowed white also. Strange seals started to appear, and before long the entire area was covered in a blinding light. Naruto covered his eyes for a bit as he tried to see, but for all his life he couldn't. The contract is made. Kushina Uzumaki is revived, the Shinigami said, and immediately disappeared. The light disappeared, and the night reigned only with the moon giving the light. Naruto opened his eyes and stared at the lovely woman in front of him. Naruto had to admit that Jiraiya wasn't kidding. Beautiful was an understatement for his mother. She was so gorgeous. Her vibrant red hair, her slender body. She was wearing a high-collared, sleeveless blouse under a long, loose-fitting pale, white skin that glowed in the moonlight and amazing blue eyes. She was wearing some simple, purplish shinobi sandals. Kushina walked into the light and came up to see a blonde with yellow hair and whisker marks. She wasn't sure what was going on, but she knew one thing. That was her son. Only her son had whisker marks on his face. She gently smiled at the shocked expression on his face as she stepped into the moonlight for Naruto to see, and she got a good look at him before giving a small smile. "Hello, Naruto-kun. It's your mother." Naruto continued to stare at his mother. Part of his mind couldn't believe it. Kushina, his mother, was alive, and she just continued to stare at him with a gentle smile. The moon reflected her beauty, giving her an almost goddess-like appearance. Her long red hair, her smooth face that didn't contain one blemish anywhere. It was then that Naruto could understand why Jiraiya told him that Kushina had to beat off some guys with a stick. She was a drop-dead, gorgeous woman. Kushina watched her son look at her like he was stunned by her presence. She could understand, but she wanted more than Naruto to stare at his mother. "Aren't you going to say anything, Sochi?" Kushina asked with the girl. Naruto continued to look at her, and his entire body trembled. His hair covered his eyes, and he looked at the ground. Kushina raised an eyebrow, but she was treated to the sight of tears going down Naruto's face. The blonde smiled and wiped his face. "Ka-san!" Naruto yelled as he ran to his revived mother and quickly grabbed her into a hug. 13 years of loneliness caught up with Naruto. 13 years of no one there for him. No mother, no father, but that was gone. Kushina widened her eyes at the initial contact as she saw Naruto bury his face in her clothes. Kushina gave a gentle smile and wrapped her arms around her son. "Come on, Sochi. Your mother is here and you're crying," Kushina said, trying to get her son to calm down. But she could understand why he was like this. Sure, she had no idea why she was alive in the first place. But if her son was alive, then she knew it would have something to do with him. But she didn't care at the minute. She just wanted to feel the warmth that she didn't get except the one time where she hugged Naruto as a baby. So for now, she was just going to settle for this feeling. Some time had passed for the mother and son as they stayed in the field. Naruto had finally calmed down, and Kushina was more than happy to allow her son the time he needed. Both sat on the ground, and silence soon reigned in the forest. This was an awkward situation for Naruto, since he wasn't really sure how talking with his mother was supposed to go. Seeing her son's distress about talking, Kushina decided to start the conversation. "So Sochi, it's good to see you. You've grown from the last time I saw you," Kushina said, and Naruto smiled while he rubbed the back of his head. The blonde blushed with a chuckle and turned to his mother. "Thanks, Ka-san. It's good to see you. I still can't believe you're here," Naruto said, and Kushina smiled with a nod. She wondered what that would mean for the chakra that Minato put for her into the QB seal, but that was beside the point right now. "Believe me, seeing my Sochi alive and well is nice also. But would you tell me why I'm alive at all?" Kushina asked, and Naruto gulped. He hadn't thought that far ahead to an explanation. The blonde sweated, and Kushina glared playfully at him. She had to admit that not even Minato could keep something from her, and the same could be said about Naruto. The blonde sighed and rubbed the back of his head. "Well, you're not going to believe me from how this story goes," Naruto said, and Kushina raised an eyebrow. How could he say that? A mother was supposed to trust her son's word. Naruto also didn't seem like the type to lie, and if he was, then Kushina would straighten that out now. "Sochi, I can't even believe I'm alive right now. You've got nothing that will surprise me," Kushina said with a confident grin. Naruto gave a blank face. In the back of his mind, he heard Kyubi laughing like mad at Kushina. She really had no idea that her son was the most unpredictable ninja of Konoha. All right, Kasen, you're going to regret those words, Naruto said and began his story. He told his mother everything down to the last detail. Needless to say, Kushina was very surprised, and a look of utter shock was evident on her face. Naruto told her about nearly dying at Final Valley, his fight with Sasuke Uchiha, and even him meeting the Shinigami. Kushina gulped when she heard all of this and had to worry about Naruto even more. Naruto also shocked Kushina to her core when he said that the Shinigami found interest in him and signed a contract with him. Now that had Kushina's interest. For Naruto to sign a contract with a god was nice. In fact, it was downright amazing, but she could only worry about it. And so Kasan, Shin said that I could only revive you if I killed 2 people, Naruto said, and Kushina widened her eyes. Naruto agreed to those terms, and he brought her back. Does that mean Naruto killed already? Or did he not do it yet? Kushina wanted to be angry, if only slightly, but the look of small shame on Naruto's face told her that the blonde had antagonized about the decision. She also didn't know whether to be happy or mad. Happy that Naruto loved her enough to want to do anything to see her, or sad that he would kill people just to see her. Maybe it was a meaningless thought, but Kushina didn't see it that way. So that's what happened, Kushina said, and Naruto nodded in all honesty. The last person he would lie to was his own mother, and besides Kyubi, no one else knew about his contract to the Shinigami, so he would have liked for someone to talk with about it. That's right, Kasan. Are you mad at me? Naruto asked, and was ready to get hit like he always was from Sakura. Kushina looked at her son, who was ready to accept her punishment, and while Kushina did worry over it, she wasn't going to hit Naruto for it. Instead, she lightly smacked Naruto upside the head, making the blonde yelp. The redhead then took Naruto into a hug, making the blonde gasp. It's all right, Sochi. I'm here for you. I'm not mad, just surprised. So tell me, how are you in Konoha? Kushina asked, and the small look on Naruto's face told her she was going to regret that question. How right she was when Naruto told her about his early life and all the loneliness he felt. Kushina felt so downhearted about the whole thing. She apologized multiple times throughout the story, and it took Naruto multiple times to assure the redhead that he had been over it. He told her that most of the village had accepted him and the people he cared for. He told her about his dreams of being Hokage, and Kushina chuckled that Naruto really was her son. She had said the same thing back when she was younger than him. It'd make her happy that her son had the same dream as her. Soon enough, Naruto told her his entire life, and Kushina smiled while looking at the sky. You did a good job, Sochi. I can't believe you beat a Hyuga. Those arrogant pricks, Kushina said, making Naruto's sweat drop. The blonde was seeing how late it was and sighed, but he didn't want to stop talking to his mother just yet. So, Kasan, Ero Sennin told me that you really knew how to handle a sword, Naruto said, and Kushina raised an eyebrow. Somewhere she remembered that name, but she for all her life couldn't remember where. Ero Sennin, Kushina said, and Naruto grinned before whispering in her ear. Kushina widened her eyes and smiled. Jiraiya was still up to his no-good trick, as usual, and now he was teaching her son? Oh, there was going to be some observation on her part. So, tell me, Naruto-kun, did Jiraiya train you like me and Minato wanted? Kushina asked, and Naruto widened his eyes. Kushina stared at him, and Naruto narrowed his eyes. When was he supposed to train me? I've only just met Ero Sennin around the Chunin exams, Naruto said, and it was Kushina's turn to widen her eyes. You mean he didn't look after you like I told him to? Kushina said, and Naruto shook his head. Kushina's hair covered her eyes, and she gave a small chuckle while her hands gripped her clothes. What about Tsunade? She told me she'd look after you as your godmother, Kushina said, and Naruto shook his head. The mother of Naruto chuckled even more as the key rolled off her body. Her hair started to raise in an odd way. The blonde backed away. So they didn't raise him like Minato, and I asked them to, huh? Kushina thought and slowly calmed down. Oh, she would have a few good words with those two about responsibilities and the such. However, luckily for them, Naruto managed to distract her thought with another question. So were you good with a sword, Kasan? Naruto asked, and Kushina turned to her son. She smiled at him, wanting to know more about her, and nodded. That's right, Sochi. Your mother was really good. I really struck the fear into most people who saw me. Really only your father and the Kage passed me. If Tsunade wasn't around, then I might have been known as the strongest woman in Konoha, Kushina said with pride. Naruto's eyes gleamed, and he looked at his mother in a new light. Kushina looked up at the sky again and smiled. Well, Sochi, it's late. Maybe you should go now, Kushina said, and Naruto got to his feet. He turned to his mother and watched her raise also. So are you coming back with me? Naruto asked. Kushina thought over the question. She wasn't sure if Naruto would be able to explain to Jiraiya about her, but she didn't want to leave her son after meeting him. She had missed a bit of his life and didn't want to be out of it anymore. Naruto could see her thinking it over, and the blonde wondered how the hell he would explain this to Jiraiya. He would be suspicious of Naruto, and then the blonde would have to tell the old sage his secret. Granted, he did really want it to be a secret, but it was starting to turn out that way. Naruto had to remember Kakashi's lesson. Deception was a shinobi's greatest tool. Naruto thought it over for a little longer, and soon his eyes gleamed. The blonde turned to his mother and motioned for her to come to him. Kushina raised an eyebrow and leaned forward while Naruto whispered in her ear. Kushina widened her eyes and smiled. That was just like her son. With Jiraiya. Jiraiya laid on his bed, contemplating his words to Naruto. He knew that he should have waited until Naruto was a Chunin to tell him. But who didn't want to know their parents? Jiraiya would have been furious if someone knew his parents and didn't tell him who they were. Naruto had been gone a long time, and Jiraiya wondered if the blonde was only seeking some peace. Sigh. Naruto, how long are you going to be gone? Jiraiya wondered, and soon he got his answer when the door opened. Jiraiya smiled and turned around. Gaki, you're late. Were you really that shocked? Jiraiya stopped and widened his eyes when he saw a sight that should have been impossible. Jiraiya gasped when he saw Kushina come through the door. KKK Kushi dash. Jiraiya stopped when he saw Kushina's smile. It was weird she was smiling, but her eyes, they weren't at all. Soon Naruto came through the door, and the blonde smiled. Hey, Ero Sennin, Naruto said, and Jiraiya turned to Naruto while his finger was pointed at Kushina, Naruto's mother. Naruto, do you know who this is? Jiraiya asked, and Naruto turned to her and smiled at her. Kushina smiled at her son before the blonde turned back to his sensei. Yes, I know. She's my mother, Kushina Uzumaki, right? Naruto asked, and Jiraiya nodded, but she was supposed to be dead. And she was walking around like she had been living all her life. BB, but how? Jiraiya asked, and Naruto grinned. Kushina smiled and walked up to Naruto. I thought I could work on a type of seal like you did, Ero Sennin. It only worked that one time, but Kyuubi told me that if given enough chakra into one clone, then it could be a beacon for a replacement soul, so long as a seal with the kanji of the person's name is on it. So I wrote Ka-san's name on it, and I poured nearly all my chakra into it. Kyuubi said that the only reason I could do it is because of my large reserves it would kill any normal person, Naruto said in faint exhaustion. Jiraiya looked at Naruto like he was insane for listening to Kyuubi of all people and then turned to Kushina. Jiraiya had no doubt that it was Kushina, her chakra signature, her features, and the smile that made most men gulp. Yep, Jiraiya could try to deny it, but that was Kushina whether he knew it or not. Naruto, do you know how dangerous that was? Jiraiya said, and Naruto nodded. He rubbed the back of his head and chuckled from the spot where Kushina had slightly smacked him upside the head. Yi-do. Ka-san already told me about that, Naruto said, and Jiraiya nodded, agreeing with Kushina's method while said redhead was mentally laughing. What the hell, brat? Reviving your mother, lying to your mentor, telling him I said these things to you. I'm so proud, Kyuubi said, making Naruto's sweat drop at his bijou. He didn't know how to take that comment, though it did help to occupy his mind, while Jiraiya stared at him for any detection of a lie. So Naruto was able to play that off since his mind was elsewhere. Jiraiya then turned to Kushina and smiled. Well, look into this, but I got to say, it's good to see you, Kushina, Jiraiya said, patting the redhead on the shoulder. Kushina chuckled with a nod and grabbed Jiraiya's shoulder and proceeded to squeeze it a bit making the Sannin wince in pain. It's good to see you too, Jiraiya. Though I'd like a question to be answered for me, Kushina said, and Jiraiya nodded. The woman turned to her son and smiled. Naruto-kun, why don't you go for a small walk? Jiraiya, and I will be a minute, Kushina said with a smile that left no room for argument. Naruto gulped and nodded before heading for the door. He quickly closed it, but pressed his ear to the door. Now, then Jiraiya, please tell me why Naruto told me he grew up alone. If I recall, Minato and I told you and Tsunade to look after him, right? Kushina asked, and Jiraiya backed away, while the redhead cracked her knuckles as she slowly advanced on the cowering Sannin. KK Kushina, I wanted to take Naruto with me, but I had to maintain the spy network, and then there was Dash. Jiraiya paused, and Kushina continued to smile. Oh, Jiraiya, you act like that's an excuse. Now don't run, cause this will only make things worse for you, Kushina said, and Naruto gulped and backed away from the door. Ah! Jiraiya yelled, and Naruto shivered. He turned to the door and stood at attention with his hand to his forehead. Goodbye, Erosenin. I'll try to revive you if you die, Naruto said, and left the hotel where there were multiple patrons who were complaining about the noise. Naruto exited the hotel and walked around the still lit-up streets. He knew it was late, but he didn't care at the moment. No, right now he was thinking about his part to the agreement. Him having to kill 2 people. No way would they be any innocent people or people close to him, maybe bandits or other people like that were fine. Naruto sighed and walked the streets. He only had Jiraiya's experiences to go on, but he felt that experiencing it for himself was going to be different. It's not going to be easy, kid, but you'll just have to get over it. You don't have for another 7 days, so there's no rush, Kyuubi said, and Naruto looked to the ground. He knew that, but that was beside the point. He really didn't want to do it anyway, even if it was his job. I know, Kyuubi. I still don't want to, Naruto said, and Kyuubi nodded before fading. The blonde walked more along the road and settled for leaning on a tree. The blonde sighed and looked up at the sky. I know I'm asking the wrong person, but Kyuubi, do you find killing to really be that simple? Naruto asked. Kyuubi wasn't expecting that question in the least and decided to humor his container. Well, to you humans, you get all emotional over it, but for me it's simple. Your line of work revolves around it. 1 minute you're alive, and the next you're meeting the Shinigami. Kid, the only thing I can tell is that when the time comes, just do it. Think about nothing else, just do it, and it will be over in a flash, Kyuubi advised, and Naruto took note of it. The blonde figured it was okay to go back, but he didn't account to the explosion that just came off a few feet away. Naruto widened his eyes and turned to the source of the explosion. Naruto quickly jumped through the trees and took out a kunai. He paused and looked at the sharp object that could easily end someone's life. The blonde watched as the light shimmered across the kunai and held it in his hand. Naruto nodded to himself and shot forward through the trees. It took the blonde about 5 minutes, but he came up to a small caravan that caught on fire. He saw multiple bodies on the ground, making the blonde widen his eyes. Naruto looked around the place, and soon he saw 2 people coming from a small fire. They were holding supplies and laughing like it was regular for them. Naruto narrowed his eyes in the trees and seethed. It had to be bandits, but way the hell out here, it was probably normal. We made a killing, bro, and I don't mean these losers. They really had some good stuff on them, one of them said to the other. From their talk, they were obviously brothers or something like it. You're such an idiot. Why'd you have to kill the 2 girls along with the guy? We could have used them, the older said, grinning like mad. They were carrying food supplies and some other things to go along with it. Naruto gritted his teeth, and his chakra flared in proportion to his anger. Naruto gripped his kunai, and for a split second, he completely forgot about fulfilling his part of the contract to the Shinigami. He just wanted them to be caught, tried, or whatever that would be right. Well, what's done is done. Let's get out of here and leave these bodies to die in the fire, the older said, and the younger nodded before the 2 started to leave. Don't think I'm going to let you leave just like that, Naruto yelled out as he came from the trees. Naruto startled the 2 bandits, and both were shocked that the person who made them jump was a kid. Hee, you gave me quite the scare, little brat. Why don't you get lost and forgot what you saw here before I change my mind and kill you? The older brother said while the younger snickered. Come on, Neeson, let's kill him, just so he won't go blabbering off to anyone, the younger said, and Naruto's hair covered his eyes. He looked at the burning carriage, and while he knew the answer, he still asked this question. Did you two do this? Naruto asked, and immediately the younger brother snickered. The older grinned and placed his stuff down and started to walk up to the blonde. And what if we did? He asked. Naruto gritted his teeth and gripped his kunai. Kyuubi watched its container, and it knew that if the guys continued in their stupidity, they wouldn't live to regret it. Naruto had never killed before, but even he found heartless killing to be found as a danger and would go against it. Just answer me, Naruto yelled, and neither said anything until the older brother was right in front of his face. Yeah, we did it. Is that all? He asked, and immediately Naruto showed his eyes. They weren't the same ocean blue eyes that sought peace and determination, but red, slitted, showing rage and hatred. I'm sorry, Naruto said in a small whisper, so low that neither could hear him. Naruto crossed his fingers. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Naruto yelled, and soon one clone came into existence. It was all Naruto would need to deal with these two. Yeah, that's all. You just took someone's life for their things, and you don't even feel regret for it, Naruto said, and what shocked the older bandit was that despite the rage, Naruto was crying. The man chuckled and sighed. That's life, brat, like it or hate, but you will experience it, the bandit said and let out a punch while the younger cheered. Naruto narrowed his eyes and, thanks to his ninja training, dodged the punch and embedded his kunai into the man's chest. Blood poured from his form and dripped over Naruto's hands. The blonde gritted his teeth as he dug the kunai in deeper. The man screamed while the blood still poured on Naruto's hands. They shivered from the screaming, but he wanted them to pay. He held out his, and the clone began to make the Rasengan inside the blonde's palm. Ni-san, the younger brother said, and Naruto held his Rasengan in his hands. This might have been overkill, or maybe Naruto was letting his emotions run wild. But that didn't matter at the moment. Rasengan. Naruto yelled as he slammed the spiraling sphere into the bandit's abdomen. With the pain of the kunai in his chest and the pain of feeling his body crushed by the Rasengan, the bandit was sent flying into the distance and slammed into a tree while Naruto turned to the younger one. I now understand, Haku. I know what you're saying, Naruto said as he came up to the younger brother. I don't want to kill you, but I will, Naruto said, and the younger bandit backed away. He gulped and took out a small knife. Naruto glared at him as the younger brother of the bandit charged at him. Naruto closed his eyes and held up his kunai. I'm sorry, Naruto said, and before he knew it all went dark. The blonde stood on the ground with his kunai in his hand. His right hand was tainted with blood, and his kunai was dripping from it. The blonde huffed while his eyes seemed to be in some sort of shock. On the ground behind him was the younger brother bandit with his throat slit. Naruto gulped and huffed like he was too tired to comprehend anything else. Soon behind came Shin, who looked at the blonde and noticed his bloody kunai. Shin didn't say anything to Naruto, as he knew the blonde wouldn't reply to anything anyway. So the death god floated over to the dead body and was about to take his soul, but Naruto quickly dashed in front of Shin and held out his hand. Shin, just give me a minute, Naruto said, and the Shinigami narrowed his eyes at his blonde summoner, but nodded and slowly backed away. Naruto looked at the dead man on the ground, and his blonde hair covered his grief-filled eyes. What Jiraiya had told him about death seemed to be nothing compared to the real thing. The blonde cried for a bit and knelt down. Kyuubi, Shin, how do you guys deal with it? Naruto asked, and both the Bijou and the Death God thought over his question. Shin had been taking souls as far as he could remember, so it was rather difficult. Kyuubi seemed to be in the same boat. Well, it won't help you, but I did revel in war and killing. It seemed right to me, but I don't know if it's the stupid connection I have to your emotions, but I'm starting to find myself wrong. I just dealt with it, and over time I got over it, Kyuubi said, and soon it was Shin's turn. I just know it's a part of all life. You must live with it, Shin said, and Naruto found it all to be true. He never felt like this. He had seen death, of course, but to do it yourself felt so different. Naruto turned around and walked back to his hotel. He didn't care what happened right now. He just wanted to get some sleep and forget all of this. Shin came up to the bodies, and he took out his sword. He quickly slashed at the bandit, ripping his soul from his body. He grabbed the soul and sucked it away into nothingness. One to fill the space of the revived person, Shin said, and floated to the other body that was slammed into the tree. The fierce burn marks on his body, especially around the abdomen, and the semi-large strike to his chest guaranteed a quick death. And one for a small interest. It must be hard, Shin said, and quickly took the soul, then disappeared, leaving the two lifeless bodies on the ground. With Naruto, the blonde trudged through the streets of the town with the small act put behind him. He didn't want to think about it at the moment. All he knew was that he wanted to get some sleep. He came up to the hotel and walked inside. It struck him as weird that the receptionist didn't see a blonde kid with blood on the right side of his sleeve and his kunai, but he didn't care. That just saved him a lot more time for not explaining. Naruto walked up the stairs and towards his room. The blonde heard talking on the other side and knew it was his mother and Jiraiya. He opened the door and looked at them watching him. "Hey Sochi, you were gone for a bit," Kushina said, and Naruto gave a simple smile. Both the Toad Sage and the revived Red Death widened their eyes when they saw Naruto's right arm. The blonde didn't even have the mindset to put away his kunai after the act. "Sochi, what happened?" Kushina asked. Jiraiya seemed interested also, and the blonde looked at the ground. He quickly discarded the top half of his orange jumpsuit and placed it on the floor. "It's nothing, Ka-san. I'm going to bed now," Naruto said, and without taking off his pants or even pulling the covers over him, Naruto laid on the bed and dropped his kunai to the ground. He didn't care about it right now. Kushina and Jiraiya looked at each other, and while Jiraiya didn't know what was wrong with Naruto, he had a hint from the bloody side of his jacket and the kunai. Kushina seemed to know also. Naruto had told her the conditions for her revival. She was worried for her son. Death wasn't something that she would ever want Naruto to experience doing, but she knew it came with the job he was in. She made it a point to talk to Naruto when he woke up tomorrow. "Well, Kushina, I'm going to follow Naruto's lead and go to bed also. I guess you should get some clothes tomorrow," Jiraiya said, and Kushina nodded in agreement with him. For now, she would sleep in the clothes she had. Kushina climbed up to Naruto's bed and laid down next to him. Kushina wasn't sure if Naruto was still awake or not, but she wrapped her arms around her son and brought his body closer to hers. "Sochi, don't worry over it. I know you'll get through it. I don't think I could say this to you, but thank you. I can't imagine how you must be feeling now that you've killed someone, and while I'm not all that thrilled about it being for me, I'm happy that you feel that way." "Thank you, Sochi," Kushina said as she closed her eyes and went to sleep. Jiraiya turned off the lights to the room, and the entire place was engulfed in silence and darkness. Jiraiya went to sleep, but Kushina and Naruto stayed awake. Well, Naruto was awake, but his mother didn't know that since his back was turned to her. Naruto remembered her words, and they made the blonde happy, if only for that time. He knew it would be hard, but he would get over it. Instead of worrying about it, Naruto would just adjust to it. He would forever feel grief and guilt for it, but he would take Kyuubi's full advice and get over it. He had to if he wanted to do what he needed. "Thank you, Ka-san," Naruto said with a smile and closed his eyes. Kushina grinned and nodded before falling asleep also. Next morning, somewhere in the fields of town, Naruto, Jiraiya, and Kushina were out in the middle of the field as they decided to work with Naruto on his control, while Kushina, mainly. She had decided to take over Naruto's training since she had always wanted to do so as his mother. Jiraiya had no objection to it in the slightest and wanted to see how Kushina could do as a teacher. Naruto had been in a bit better shape and figured that training would get his mind off of the incident from yesterday. Jiraiya had gone off back to town while Kushina was introducing taijutsu to Naruto, and the blonde wanted so much to hate his mother right then. "Man, Sochi, you've got no real taijutsu stance." "Well, don't worry. Kasen's going to straighten that out of you right now by teaching you her taijutsu style," Kushina said as Naruto fell to the ground and huffed. "Kasan, you're crazy," Naruto said, and Kushina chuckled at her son. She swiped her hand through her hair and watched Naruto get to his feet. Practice makes perfect, Sochi, now do it again, Kushina said, and Naruto went through the difficult katas of his mother's taijutsu. She called it decapitation taijutsu, which revolved around hitting precise points of the body and making it useless, or even more effective was to cut the limbs off or make it seem that way. Perfect for a kenjutsu user. Kushina had said that she invented the style herself, and it was a renowned style in Konoha. Pretty good, Sochi, Kushina said, and Naruto strained a nod of thanks. Will you take a break? I'm gonna go and get some clothes, Kushina said, walking off. Naruto nodded and watched his mother leave. He stayed underneath a tree and sighed as he felt more and more relaxed. Wake up, Blondie, Shin said, making Naruto gasp as he turned around. They raised an eyebrow to see his summon there and stood to his feet. Don't do that, Naruto said, making the Shinigami chuckle. Naruto then widened his eyes and smiled. It might not have been much, but he managed to get the Shinigami to laugh. So what do you want? I honored our contract, right? Naruto asked, and the Shinigami nodded. He then rummaged through his white robes and pulled out a scroll. It's time you also became my actual summoner, the Shinigami said, and Naruto raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Naruto asked, and the Shinigami grinned as he set the scroll down next to the bed. Naruto Uzumaki, it's time for you to learn how to use my powers. I'm going to teach you the forbidden jutsus of a death god, Shin said, and Naruto widened his eyes. Even Kyuubi was interested in this one. What do you mean, learn your jutsus? Naruto asked, and the Shinigami grinned. I'm going to make you a human Shinigami, Shin said, and if Naruto was surprised, then this was drop-dead stunning. It was official. Shin was the best summon in the world. But I've only just got your contract. Don't you think that it might be a rush? Naruto asked, and Shin raised an eyebrow. He did see Naruto's point and went over his words. I suppose that's true. For what I have planned, as you are now, it might kill you, if not for our contract, Shin said, and Naruto gulped. He wondered what Shin could possibly want him to do. Then how about you give me another 3 weeks, just to get used to this, then you can teach me all those cool jutsus, Naruto said. Normally, he would kill for the chance to learn anything new, especially from Shin, but he just wanted the time to get over last night's incident, so this would help him, if only slightly. Fine uno guess. I don't want to see what you can come up with in a fight, so I won't rush this, Shin said, and Naruto grinned with a nod. Immediately, the Shinigami faded, and the blonde sighed. He then slumped on the 3 while Kyuubi decided to come in. What's wrong with you, brat? Normally, you never shut up about training, but you want to wait for this one? Kyuubi asked, and Naruto chuckled. I suppose. Don't worry, I'm going to learn those amazing techniques. I can't wait to see the look on everyone's face when I show them how good I am. Tsunade-bachan might give me that hat right then and there, Naruto said as his eyes gleamed with excitement. Kyuubi's sweat dropped and shook his head at his blonde container. And to think I worried about him over nothing, Kyuubi thought and widened his eyes. He was worried about Naruto? No way in hell. He hated all humans. He wanted to kill them all. He was a damn demon for Kami's sake. How the hell could he be worried about anyone? You alright? You just went silent, Naruto said, shocking Kyuubi. I'm fine, and I don't need you worrying about me, Kyuubi said, and immediately cut the connection, making Naruto raise an eyebrow. What the hell just happened? Naruto wondered, and immediately the blonde turned his head to see his mother and sensei coming back. She was carrying something in her hands. It was wrapped in a cloth, and Kushina had an expression of glee on her face. Hello, Sochi. Did you enjoy your break? Kushina asked, and Naruto nodded, not having his eyes leave the sight of what his mother could possibly be holding. It was nice, Kasan, Naruto said, and Kushina nodded. Well, that's nice, Databane. Now then, I have a surprise for you, Kushina said, and dropped the clothed item into Naruto's lap. The blonde raised an eyebrow at the gift and turned to his mother. What's this, Ka-san? Naruto asked, and Kushina kept a gentle smile across her face. Naruto gave her a small grin, and she urged him to unwrap the small gift. Naruto chuckled at the very early birthday present. He had never gotten a present before except for some practice kunai from Irika and Saratobi at one time. All the other times were just a quick hello and happy birthday greeting, or maybe a treat to Ichiraka ramen for Naruto. So to get something else, especially from his mother, was a good feeling. The blonde finished unwrapping his gift and widened his eyes. Inside the cloth was a medium-sized sword with a slight curve to its shape. The handle was orange with a small red swirl hanging off the back end of the. Next to his sword was a black sheath with an orange flame pattern. Ka-san, Naruto asked in shock, and Kushina grinned. I'm going to teach you all that I know, Sochi. I want you to follow in the footsteps of our clan, your father, and your mother. I know you can do it, Kushina said, and Naruto's eyes gleamed. He'd be learning his mother's kenjutsu, his father's other techniques, and the Uzumaki clan's jutsus. It was all a lot for the blonde to take in for himself. How did you pay for this? Naruto asked, and Kushina smiled while waving around a wallet. Oh, Jiraiya helped me. He said no at first, but I convinced him to help me, Kushina said with her smile never leaving her face, which made Naruto gulp. Mothers are scary, Naruto said and got to his feet. The blonde took the sword into his hands, and he watched his mother take it into a taijutsu stance. Well, come on, Sochi. I'm in charge of your training, and we're going to make up for lost time as mother and son, Kushina said, and Naruto grinned. He would want nothing more than that. Just be ready, Ka-san. I'll show you that I'm worthy to be called an Uzumaki, Naruto said, and Kushina chuckled. Definitely is my son, Kushina said and stared at Naruto. Well, I'm going to show you why people call me the Red Death, Kushina said, and Naruto chuckled. Ero Sennin told me. You were so fast that the only thing people saw was a blur of your beautiful red hair, Naruto said, and Kushina hid a small blush across her face and smiled. Oh, he told you that. You the second person to compliment my hair, Kushina said, and Naruto grinned at that. His mother's hair really was beautiful. It made the blonde wonder what it was like to have his mother's hair. It might have made him look cool, but he had to admit that it wouldn't go with his orange jumpsuit. Let me guess that Two-san was the first, Naruto asked, and Kushina nodded. That's right. The both of us called it the red string of fate, Kushina said, and Naruto wondered about it. That name had a nice ring to it. Well, that's enough talk. Show me what you got, Sochi, Kushina said, and Naruto nodded with a grin. Gotcha, Ka-san. Here, I go, Databeo, Naruto yelled, and charged his mother with his sword that he would be using in the future. Kushina smiled as she watched her son came at her. That form is sloppy, and his grip is weak. Oh, Sochi, you have much to learn, but you are my Sochi, Kushina said in thought with a smile as both mother and son trained the day away. Kushina watched Naruto pant and huff his frustration as he rested on the ground. Naruto had been training with his mother in kenjutsu for the past 3 hours, and his mother was brutal. She really didn't know how to hold back at all. Naruto couldn't even get one chance at her, but how could he? She was a former kenjutsu legend, and she was too fast to see. At times, Naruto lost the sight of her altogether, and Kushina would joke that she would have already killed him at least 1,000 times already. Naruto pouted at his mother, but he knew it to be true. He just couldn't match up to his mother, but that didn't mean he would give up. He would beat her at her own game, and she would drop her jaw when she saw what he could do. Currently, the redhead and the blonde were still in the training field with Naruto panting and staring at his mother's form over him. She had that arrogant smirk on her face which made the blonde pout. Well, Naruto-kun, your kenjutsu is horrible and your taijutsu. Well, moving along with that, Kushina said, and Naruto's eyebrow twitched. He really would make his mother eat those words. Maybe not today, maybe not in a year, but he would make her pay some day. It's not my fault. I've never held a katana before in my life, and I try to make my own taijutsu, but Kakashi-sensei never really taught me that, Naruto said, and Kushina raised an eyebrow. She remembered Kakashi. How could she not? The white-haired boy spent almost all his time with Minato. She figured it was purely out of simple respect and admiration. Kakashi didn't teach you anything? He told me that he'd be more than thrilled to teach you when I had you, Kushina said, and Naruto raised an eyebrow. Sounds like people told him and his mother a lot of things. He's been training Sasuke the whole time. He never really trained me except in tree walking, Naruto said, and Kushina's red hair covered her eyes. Naruto saw her clench her hands into fists and giggled, making Naruto gulp. Is that so? Kushina said and looked at the sky. Naruto didn't know what his mother was thinking, but it must have been downright evil. Run, Kakashi-sensei! Naruto yelled, and back in Konoha, said Jonin sneezed, and a shiver ran down his spine before he felt the urge to count down the rest of his life before something happened. Meanwhile, Kushina decided to help her son up to his feet and rested him against the tree for shade. Well, Naruto-kun, we have more than enough time to straighten you out. Tell me what you can do, and I'll help you improve on it, Kushina said, and Naruto nodded. He went over all of his abilities and told her about the Kage Bunshin technique and his completion of the Rasengan. Kushina smiled at everything. Leave it to her son to have two powerful techniques at his disposal. Naruto had variations of the Kage Bunshin, but other than that, those two techniques were all he had currently. He, of course, told her about the summoning contract with the Toads and the Shinigami, which made Kushina stiffen, but she seemed to forget about it. When Naruto was done, Kushina crossed her arms and smiled. You're just like me, Naruto-kun, Kushina said, and Naruto wondered what she meant by that. Kushina giggled and elaborated for Naruto. What I mean is that you learn from doing something. I was never one for books. I hated the things, but you give me something to do physically, then I got it down in no time at all. That's how we'll teach you, Naruto. Remember I told you that I would teach you my taijutsu and kenjutsu. Jiraiya will work on your chakra control, and I'll watch him when he does. He told me about these 2 years you have to train, and we'll make every one of those days count, Kushina said, and Naruto nodded with a look of sheer determination. Naruto stood to his feet and raised his fist to his mother. I'll do it, Kasan. I'll make you proud, and I'll stun Konoha with my amazing skills, Naruto said, and Kushina nodded. He really was her son after all. Kushina stood to her feet and patted her son's head. All right, then get out to the field, Naruto-kun. We'll work on your taijutsu first, Kushina said, and Naruto nodded. They both walked for a bit, and Kushina turned to him. All right, from what I observed of your taijutsu, you need a whole new style. It left too many openings and far too many chances for counters. Luckily for you, I invented my own, which is in reference to my name, which is called Habanero Heat. It relies on the fast and swift movements of your limbs. It's more of anticipating your opponent's reaction and deadly a mixture of speed and strength. The hardest part of this taijutsu is to find the equal parts of both strength and speed. You only have a split second to build up that power, but I found a way to do it. You'll get it down too, probably faster than me, Kushina said with a giggle. Naruto's eyes gleamed, and Kushina smiled as she took out a scroll and unsealed 2 pieces of paper. Naruto stared at them intently and turned to his mother. Kushina picked up the 2 pieces of paper and slapped one on Naruto's arm. She then slapped the other on his left leg and channeled chakra into each of them. As soon as she did, Naruto slammed into the ground like he felt Gamabunta was sitting on him. Kasan, this is heavy, Naruto struggled to say, and Kushina nodded. She really didn't want to see her son struggle, but she knew it would him in the long run. These are training weights that I made. I'm a pretty good seal master if I do say so myself. Right now, you don't have the required speed to do my taijutsu or my kenjutsu. When you reach an appropriate speed, the color of the paper will change. Right now it's white, and the appropriate speed is navy blue, Kushina said, and Naruto widened his eyes. He was supposed to move like this until his seals change color? Ka-san, this is evil, Naruto said, and Kushina chuckled. You said you wouldn't complain, Naruto-kun, Kushina said, and Naruto sighed. He merely nodded and strained his body to get up. Kushina watched the blonde get up, and it amazed her that Naruto was already on his feet. When she tried it for the first time, she couldn't even get up for about half an hour, but Naruto was already up. The sight only served to make Kushina smile at her son more. Well, for now, we'll have your body get accustomed to wearing those seals for the days. You won't be completely adjusted to the seals for a few days or even weeks, but it'll serve to make you stronger, Kushina said and walked off. Naruto watched his mother leave, and he gasped. She really wanted to kill him, but Naruto didn't let that get him down. He tried to look at the positive. He would be wicked strong when this was all over, and he would have his mother to thank for it. Not to mention that Shin wanted to turn him into a human Shinigami. He wondered what kind of techniques he would be learning, but first he had to walk back to his room. "Well, brat, you've gotten into a weird situation." Kyuubi chuckled, and Naruto sighed. He knew he was going to hear his tenant sometime, and he knew that Kyuubi was going to laugh at him. "It's not funny. Man, this is hard," Naruto said as he trudged through the plains back to the town where they were staying. Each step was like moving a damn boulder with his body. "Forward and march, kit. Hup 2, 3, 4. Hup 2, 3, 4, Kyuubi said, sounding like a drill sergeant smiling all the way as he talked. Naruto grunted his pain. He would give anything to get this heaviness off of him. As the blonde walked, he came up to the site where his mother had kicked his ass all those times. He saw his sword still on the ground, and the blonde narrowed his eyes. He quickly reached for his sword and tried to get it off the ground, but the combined weight of the seals and the sword made it even harder for Naruto to pick up. Naruto steeled his nerves and pulled with all his might, and finally he managed to bring his sword to his hands. Naruto looked at the sword, and the blonde sighed. The hardest part is to find the equal parts to both strength and speed. Naruto remembered his mother's words and narrowed his eyes. If he was going to adjust it to the seals, then he would have to do it now. He came on this training trip to do just that, train, and he was going to... Naruto crossed his fingers, and the fire burned in his eyes. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto yelled and made 10 clones. The blonde took his sword into his hands and struggled to raise it, but when he did, he turned to all his clones and waved his hands. "Bring it on," Naruto said, and all his clones charged at him. He wouldn't lose to Sasuke. He wouldn't be considered the dope anymore. He would change, and he would show them all the new him. Nighttime. Jiraiya and Kushina were currently inside the hotel when Naruto came through the door. The two had waited for him all day, and Kushina began to worry if she overdid it with the seals, but they were both relieved and worried when they saw him. Naruto's face was covered in bruises, and his clothes were in tears. He really looked like he had seen better days. Kushina and Jiraiya wondered what he had been doing, and Naruto smiled. "Kasen, we're going to be training tomorrow, so get ready," Naruto said and immediately dropped to the floor. Jiraiya turned to Kushina and chuckled while he held his stomach. "He's always been the impatient type. You were the same way, you know," Jiraiya said, and Kushina lightly pouted at Jiraiya being mean. The sage sighed and picked up Naruto, then placed him on the bed. The blonde was knocked out cold if his snoring was anything to go by. He must have been training with his clones. "No wonder he's so beat up," Jiraiya said, and Kushina widened her eyes. She might have slightly underestimated her son's resolve. Kushina walked up to him and ruffled his hair while her finger traced his jawline. Kushina giggled as she watched her son twitch to her movements, but then decided to stop. She ran her fingers over his whisker marks and smiled again. She just couldn't stop smiling now that she was with her son. Naruto muttered something and shifted on the bed and unintentionally grabbed Kushina's hand. The redhead smiled and turned to see Jiraiya go to sleep also. Kushina turned out the light and got into the bed with her son. This made her giggle only because she never figured at her age she would still be sharing a bed with her son. But seeing the circumstances, she could understand, and she would rather be with her son than Jiraiya, not knowing what the perv would try on her. Kushina kissed her son's cheek and closed her eyes, allowing the sleep to claim her. She'd never been so peaceful in her life. 1 week later, Naruto was back in the training field with Kushina going over his taijutsu. Naruto told her about his training with clones and that trying to get adjusted to the seals would take too long, and he didn't want any time to get lost on this trip. Kushina nodded in understanding and went a little ahead of the schedule that she planned for herself and Naruto. Naruto had gotten somewhat used to the seals on his body. He could at least walk for the most part and slightly run, but it still had his problems as Kushina said he would. Currently, Naruto was doing his stretches with Kushina as they got prepared for another day. Kushina told Naruto that his speed would also increase if he was more flexible, so she was helping him with that. Naruto was doing the stretch where his legs were spread out while he sat on the ground and stretched forward while Kushina pushed him lower with her hand. "Kasen, you're killing me," Naruto said, and Kushina giggled. "No complaining, Naruto," Kushina said as she pushed him lower to the ground. Naruto gritted his teeth at the pain he was feeling, and he heard his bones snap multiple times. "So, what are we working on now?" Naruto asked, trying to grit his teeth through the entire stretch. "Well, after your warm-up, I'm going to attach you the correct posture for holding your sword. Then after that, I'll show you a few movements to my taijutsu. You might not get it right away, but I've got the perfect method with which to show you," Kushina said, and Naruto nodded with a smile, but not before he screamed as he felt his back give way to the pain he was feeling. After his warm-up, Naruto sat on the ground and watched his mother stand in front of him. Kushina smiled as she wanted her son to pay close attention. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," Kushina thought, and immediately a clone appeared next to her, making Naruto widen his eyes. Kushina smiled at his shocked face, while Naruto sputtered nonsense like he was trying to confirm what he'd just say. "Keikasan, how did you do that?" "You just did my technique with no hand signs," Naruto said with his eyes completely focused on his mother. Kushina chuckled and rubbed the back of her head in embarrassment. "Well, Naruto-kun, let's just say that I have a perfect control over it," Kushina said, and Naruto's eyes widened again. If he could learn that, then he could surprise so many people that he'd have enough time to do other things. He had to get his mother to teach him how to do that. "All right, Naruto-kun, time to focus on taijutsu. I want you to watch me and my clone perfectly. Never take your eyes off us," Kushina said, and Naruto nodded. The two redheads squared off, and Kushina nodded. The clone grinned and charged at her, then let out a punch. But Kushina saw it coming, and with a speed that made Naruto gasp, she ducked under it and slammed her fist into the clone's stomach. The clone coughed, but didn't dispel, which was the first thing Naruto noticed. However, the clone was quick on the rebound and grabbed Kushina's hand, then flung her over its shoulder. Kushina gritted her teeth, and with a beautiful turn, she landed on her feet and pivoted her foot to aim at the clone's chest. Her hit connected, and Kushina sent the clone flying into the tree, making it dispel. She brushed a hand through her hair and turned back to Naruto. "It's countering at its best, Naruto-kun, baiting the opponent, and when you have them, you unleash all your power, speed, and strength to cause them pain. It's all internal, but hurts like hell, Databane," Kushina said, and Naruto nodded that he understood. "All right, you try it. Remember that the object is to anticipate, then react, and finally counter at full force," Kushina said, and Naruto nodded. He crossed his fingers and yelled. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu," Naruto yelled, making one clone. Both stood away from the other and cracked their knuckles. Kushina gave them the signal to begin. The two Narutos ran at each other and began their spar. Kushina sighed as she saw Naruto's form. He wasn't countering like she was. His countering was slower, and his chakra control was shot. One hit to his clone, and it was gone. She'd have to get him on Kenjutsu and chakra control before taijutsu, or they wouldn't be getting anything done. Naruto seemed to sense his mother's slight frustration and sighed. He wondered if this was really his preferred style of fighting and was about to apologize to her, but Kushina patted his shoulder. "Keep trying it, Naruto-kun. It's not going to be easy, but here we go," Kushina said as she walked in front of Naruto. The blonde raised an eyebrow, and Kushina smiled. "Hit me," she said, and Naruto raised an eyebrow. Kushina pointed to her face and said, "Hit me." "Come on, Naruto-kun," she said to him. Naruto narrowed his eyes and wondered if this was all right, but sighed and let out a punch. Kushina's smile turned into a smirk as she grabbed Naruto's hand and kicked him in the stomach, making the blonde skid back and hit the floor. "Come on, Naruto-kun. Hit me. If you don't, then you're not getting dinner," Kushina said, and Naruto gasped. "He wouldn't get dinner?" Kushina sighed and rushed at Naruto, then punched him in the face. "You're not going to let your mother kick you all over the place, are you?" Kushina asked, and Naruto gritted his teeth as he stood up from the ground. Kushina appeared behind him and kicked him across the field. She didn't like this, but felt like she knew Naruto's thoughts. It was like saying, "If I experience it, then I will learn how to do it." That's what Kushina thought anyway. Naruto coughed and held his stomach in pain. The blonde cursed under his breath. He didn't want to hurt his mother, but her punches and kicks were bone-shattering. Naruto huffed and got to his feet as Kushina appeared in front of him. She let out a punch, and Naruto's eyes burned. He quickly sidestepped Kushina despite the heavy seals on his body, making Kushina widen her eyes. She smirked and nodded. "I knew I was right," Kushina said and ran back at Naruto. The blonde struggled to stand, but he clearly saw his mother's hit. After a week of getting hit all the time and the pain that came with it, Naruto was more than able to try and counter it. All he had to do was know that he could. Kushina let out a kick, and Naruto jumped over it. His body was heavy. It was weighing him down and making his breathing hitch even more, but he was known for his stamina, and he'd be damned if he didn't try anymore because of a little setback. The blonde quickly backflipped away, and Kushina smiled. Naruto's stretches were making him more flexible. He was getting more and more into it. It was all too fast. His mind didn't have the time to think about anything, but Naruto was moving on instinct. The feeling of getting hit, the pain that came with it, the bitter memories of getting hit by Sakura, they were all fueling his senses at the moment. Naruto breathed easily for a second, but blocked a punch to the gut and tried to slam his foot into Kushina's side, but the redhead wouldn't have that and blocked it easily. She was impressed. Naruto had the countering now. He had been working on it all week, but he got it. Kushina just found the perfect method for training her son. Unknown to either of them, the Shinigami was watching and a small grin appeared on his face. "He'll make a great human Shinigami when I'm through with him," Shin said and continued to watch. Naruto gritted his teeth and gasped. He backed away from Kushina as his mother tended to her side. Naruto had at least one hit on his mother. Kushina winced slightly, but smiled as she stopped her movements. "You did it, Naruto-kun. Even if it was just a scratch, you did it," Kushina said, and Naruto smiled. He huffed and fell to the ground. Well, almost. As he fell, he landed into Kushina's arms, making the woman smile. She pulled up his sleeve and looked at his seal. Sure enough, it changed from white to yellow. Kushina grinned and hugged her son. "That's my son, Databane," Kushina said as she and Naruto rested in the field. Jiraiya chuckled at the sight he had been observing. He would teach Naruto how to improve the Rasengan and control some of Kyuubi's chakra, but Kushina was probably the best teacher that Naruto could ever ask for. 2 weeks later, Naruto, Kushina, and Jiraiya were currently in Hot Springs Country, just traveling for the moment. They were looking for a short break from their walking and training. Naruto had gotten into further depth of the habanero heat taijutsu style from his mother, and he had the aches and pains to prove it. He had gotten countering down, so now he was working on the next step to her taijutsu. He still had his flaws, but slowly and surely Kushina was literally beating it out of him. Jiraiya had told Naruto a bit about Fuinjutsu, since the blonde was developing an interest into the art. When the sage told him that it was the hardest study out of all the shinobi arts, Naruto just replied stating that he didn't care and he'd have it down, making Kushina and Jiraiya chuckle. Kushina had also told Naruto about her unique chakra ability, which consisted of chakra chains, which she demonstrated about a few days ago. Naruto had asked her if he could do it too since he was her son, but Kushina said that she wasn't sure. However, things weren't all that bad as Naruto stared to show the early signs of success with the seals that Kushina used on him. He still had them on, but his body was slightly lighter and he could run normally as he always did. He could do his standard exercises with them on, and he could counter most of Kushina's attacks when she wasn't full-blown serious. In the meantime, Naruto had spoken to the Shinigami about a week ago and agreed that he would like to be the full summoner to him and have his complete training in the arts of the Shinigami. Naruto still had the scar on his upper chest from the encounter. Flashback. Naruto quietly left the hotel room and walked out into the woods. He quickly walked deep into the woods and asked Kyuubi to make sure that no one was following him. Kyuubi gave the blonde a nod that he was in the clear for at least a good half a mile, and Naruto nodded with a thanks. He looked at the seal on his right hand and narrowed his eyes. Naruto breathed slowly and bit his thumb. The blonde bit his thumbs and traced the blonde over the seal. Kuchios no jutsu, Naruto yelled, and his seal glowed bright, as usual. Naruto covered his eyes, and soon the seal faded. The blonde felt Shin's presence behind him and turned around. Sure enough, he saw the Shinigami right behind him. Now, if you keep seeing something over and over, it won't scare you all the time, and Naruto was beginning to feel that way since he had known Shin for a bit. Something I can help you with, Naruto? Shinigami asked, and Naruto looked at the ground and smiled. Shin waited for Naruto's response, and the blonde grinned at him, making the Shinigami raise an eyebrow. Even Kyuubi didn't know what Naruto wanted with the Shinigami. He knew it wasn't to revive someone, since Naruto was still at odds with himself considering it. He had tried to put it in the back of his mind at times, but it would resurface and Naruto would go silent every 3 hours that it happened. Yes, Shin, I summoned you to say that I want to be your full summoner, and I'd like you to teach me how to be a human Shinigami, Naruto said, making Kyuubi and the Shinigami widen their eyes. Shin never expected an answer this early. Are you sure? Shin said, and Naruto nodded with an absolute resolve that told Shin all that he needed to know. The Shinigami stared at Naruto for a second, but the blonde stared at him back. He wasn't sure if he could handle the responsibility, but he knew that he could handle whatever Shin threw at him. That's right, I'm sure, Databayo. You made me your summoner because you said I was interesting. Well, I'm going to keep showing you the things that make me interesting. I never back down, and I'll never run from my responsibility, Naruto said, and Shin grinned. Kyuubi smirked inside his cage, and the Shinigami took his sword out of his mouth. He looked at it longingly and turned to Naruto. I will never be using this sword again, Shin said, and Naruto widened his eyes. It was then that Shin held his sword out and made Naruto gasp when he pushed it through his body. Naruto felt his life flash before his eyes, and he thought he would die. But instead of feeling his life leave his body, he felt his soul filled. He'd been embraced with a slight warmth, but a small coldness. A small aura flowed around Naruto's body, and the blonde turned to the Shinigami. Shin just stared at him with his menacing gaze, and after a while he set Naruto down, and the Kyuubi Jinchuriki noticed all the aura directed into his sword. It glowed for only a small second, but then faded. Naruto also noticed that he had a scar in the middle of his chest showing where the Shinigami had pierced him. If you're so sure of your responsibilities, then you will bear them. I'll keep watching you. Your sword will own my sword properties. Don't abuse it. Your training will begin when I deem you fit, Shin said and disappeared. Naruto continued to look at the darkness and turned to his sword. He took up the sword in his hands. The weight was still there, but the blonde wasn't focused on that at the moment. He unsheathed his sword and started at it. It didn't look any different from the shiny metal that it already was, but for some weird reason Naruto could feel the essence inside the sword. Maybe he was dreaming or not, but he knew what he was feeling. It wasn't a normal sword anymore. It was the sword of the Shinigami. Neither Kushina nor Jiraiya were aware of what happened that night, nor the destiny that would await Naruto because of his choice. Flashback end. Naruto snapped out of his stupor when he realized that they stopped walking. He looked up and raised an eyebrow when he saw them stop in front of Shinobi's store. The blonde raised an eyebrow and turned to Jiraiya like he had expected better. I'm being trained here, Naruto asked, and Jiraiya sighed. Kushina giggled while Jiraiya shook his head. Of course not. Give me some credit here. We're going to be doing missions. This is one of the contacts to Konoha that handle missions for people like me, Jiraiya said, and Naruto crossed his arms and tried to wonder what the hell Jiraiya was talking about. Even Kushina was confused with that one, and Jiraiya sighed. I'm surrounded by idiots, Jiraiya thought to himself, and turned to the Uzumaki duo. You both know I'm not in Konoha the whole time, but I still take missions. It's because of outposts like this. I receive a mission to this location every 2 weeks to a month, and I submit my reports here. Sarutobi-sensei would give me my pay, and it would be added to my mission record. Jiraiya explained, making Kushina and Naruto nod that they understood. Kushina didn't know, because such a system wasn't around when Minato was the Hokage. Naruto had no idea, since he didn't know what it was like to be an S-rank shinobi, but he would one day. "So we're here for a mission?" Naruto asked, and Jiraiya nodded. Naruto gulped since he was shaky with his fighting. He could run, walk, use chakra to a certain degree, but fighting was kind of different. He doubted he could even take on Sasuke with this much weight holding him down. He was probably lucky he was walking and running, let alone training, but that's how he did things. "So what are we going to do?" "Fight bandits," Naruto asked, and Kushina turned to Jiraiya. The sage sighed and rubbed the back of his head. "I haven't checked yet. Remember, she won't give me anything over the top if you're with me. I haven't even told her that Kushina is alive because of you." "I can only imagine her surprise," Jiraiya said, and Naruto turned to his mother, who was smiling, but he wasn't looking at that. He was shuddering because he was looking at her eyes. Her eyes aren't smiling. They're not smiling. She's not happy. Naruto yelled out mentally while Kushina thought over her meeting with Tsunade and how it would go. "Well, that aside, let's go inside. It'll give us the chance to test your skills and see where you still need improvement," Jiraiya said, and Naruto gulped. He didn't really have anything to go on. His mother taught him her taijutsu for the few weeks, and she taught him a few katas for his sword, which he had gone quite a ways with the Kagabunshin technique, since his mother told him the secret to it, and why it was considered a B-rank jutsu. Whatever the clone learns and does then dispels, then the user will learn it also. That's why it was great for stealth missions and infiltration missions. Ever since then, he had used his clones to learn how to use his sword to at least genin level and train his taijutsu to mid-chunin. He had a lot of pain and suffering from it now, but it was all in the interest of training. "All right, let's go. I hope we get something good," Naruto said as he followed Jiraiya, and Kushina followed Naruto inside. They came to see an old man behind a desk. Naruto and Kushina took the chance to observe the inside of the shop. It was filled to the brim with all the latest weapons and outfits from Konoha. It was then that Kushina took the chance to get some things since she hadn't really gone shopping. Kushina tapped Jiraiya's shoulder and smiled. Jiraiya groaned and gave her his wallet, and the woman went on a spree as she picked out several weapons, outfits, and tools for herself. Jiraiya tried not to cry while Naruto chuckled at the sight. Finally, all those times Jiraiya took his money were coming right back at him. "Karma is awesome, Databayo," Naruto yelled out mentally, making Kyubi nod even though he couldn't see it. "Even though it could be a bitch at times," Kyubi said, and Naruto nodded in agreement. He could attest to that, and so could Kyubi. Jiraiya simply watched as Kushina bought more tools and clothes until she brought them up to the counter. "Ring this up, please," Kushina said with a grin, and the man turned to Jiraiya, and the sage sighed and nodded. He rung up the price, and Kushina paid for it all and gave the wallet back to Jiraiya and gave him her thanks. Naruto and Kyubi continued to grin at Jiraiya's expense, while Kushina sealed all of her clothes and new tools into some of the scrolls she bought in the last town they went to. They sold some high-quality scrolls and even some high-quality ink. Kushina was really ecstatic about it, but Naruto wasn't sure why. Maybe it was just her thing, but that was beside the point. Jiraiya walked up to the counter and flashed his papers to the old man. The man nodded and pulled out a scroll and handed it to Jiraiya. The Sannin nodded and walked out of the place with Kushina and Naruto following him. When they were out of the shop, Jiraiya pulled out the scroll and opened it. "So what do we have?" Naruto asked. Jiraiya hushed him and looked it over closed it with a grin. "We're in luck. We have a B-rank mission," Jiraiya said, and Naruto's eyes gleamed. Kushina grinned at her son's enthusiasm and listened as Jiraiya explained. "Basically, we need to go T-Country and help protect their daimyo's treasury from thieves. His elite guards aren't capable of handling the bandits since these guys are ex-shinobi. Tsunade says it's a B rank because there's the possibility of an A rank missing Nin in the group. Nothing too hard, I suppose," Jiraiya said before seeing Kushina and Naruto grinning with excitement. He had a sweat drop when he realized just who he was talking to. "I can't wait for this," Naruto yelled out, and Kushina grinned. "I'm gonna have some fun today, Databane," Kushina said, and the Uzumaki duo were already ready to go. Jiraiya sighed as he brought them out of their celebration. "I don't know if you two realize, but T-Country is at least 3 to 4 days away. Not to mention that the sun is going down, so we should head out tomorrow, Jiraiya said, making Kushina and Naruto pout. We'll get a motel for the night, then we'll leave first thing in the morning, Jiraiya said and walked off. Kushina and Naruto sighed as they followed Jiraiya towards their motel for the night. Nighttime. Naruto sighed as he looked up at the ceiling in his bedroom. He still thought about his interaction with Shin that week ago, and it unnerved him to not know what happened to his sword. It was the same when Kushina had taught him the right stance to begin with, and even the right posture. He had used the sword in small practice matches with Kushina and his clones, so he was getting the natural feel for it. It made him happy that he was progressing, but he knew he still had much to learn. Then there were the responsibilities that Shin said Naruto would have. But he said that Naruto wouldn't be trained until Shin felt he was sure of Naruto, so the blonde merely dealt with it for the time being. Naruto shifted in his bed and sighed again. He wasn't sure, but he felt like he was becoming more like Shikamaru with each sigh that escaped from his lips. He turned in his sheets and closed his eyes, but then the door opened. Both Jiraiya and Kushina came through the door with Jiraiya immediately going to sleep. Kushina straightened her hair and left the room for a second and went into the bathroom. Naruto wasn't sure what she was doing, but he figured she was preparing for bed, just like him. He was facing the wall, but he still had a good view of the room out of the corner of his eye, and the sight that Naruto saw surprised him. Kushina came out of the bathroom with a simple t-shirt showing her lovely breasts and flat stomach. She was also wearing some red shorts that complemented her hair. Naruto gulped and cursed the fact that no motel ever had a 3-bedroom setting or none that they could find. His eyes roamed his mother's form for a bit before she was out of his field of vision. He heard her creep into the bed next to him, and Naruto felt the urge for sleep leave him. He was also mentally berating himself. This was his mother for Kami's sake. This was so sick, but the closeness of the two made it hard for Naruto to think of anything else. The smell of her hair invaded his senses, and the movement of her body as she wrapped him in the usual hug was also agonizing. He could feel her mounds against his back and her breath on his neck. This is not good. Why did she have to be my mother? Naruto wondered, and Kyuubi chuckled at his container's problem. This was so funny to watch to the fox spirit. Meanwhile, Naruto just stayed silent and tried to sleep it off. When he revived, his mother had to admit that she was a hot woman. He had remembered her face against the moon and her presence. Naruto sighed and simply forced himself to go to sleep. He'd just have to put up with his mother's closeness for now, but this would be bad if he didn't do something. Next morning, Naruto groaned as they walked along the trail towards Tea Country. He hadn't gotten that much sleep, or rather he did, but he was more tired than when he was last awake. Naruto stared off into the distance and remained quiet for the trip. He wasn't sure what to talk about, or rather he was worried that he was the only one who found the situation to be awkward. "Kit, you must be weird to even think what you're thinking," Kyuubi said, and Naruto blushed before he narrowed his eyes. "What are you talking about?" Naruto asked, feigning ignorance, but Kyuubi wouldn't have any of that. Oh no, he would enjoy having fun with his container until it was no longer funny, but Kyuubi wasn't sure that it was ever going to be that way. "Don't play dumb with me, Kit. I never thought that you'd be a little Mother Dash." "Shut up. Right now. Don't you dare complete that sentence." Naruto mentally yelled, and Kyuubi cackled. Oh, this was going to be too much fun for the fox demon. Naruto sighed and cut the connection with Kyuubi and continued walking. Kushina stared at her son for a few minutes, and, based on his face, she knew something was wrong with him. He was more tired than usual, he was being very talkative, and he was muttering to himself. She had stared at him for a bit of time and could only wonder what he was thinking. "Naruto-kun, are you all right?" Kushina asked, and Naruto snapped out of his stupor. He turned to his mother, and while it was hard, he managed to force last night down and talk to her. "Yeah, Ka-san, I'm fine." "What?" Naruto asked, and Kushina simply shrugged her shoulders. For some reason, that answer didn't sit well with her, but she decided to let it go for now. "Oh, nothing. You're just not being your usual self," she said, and Naruto widened his eyes. Seeing that reaction, Kushina felt like she hit the nail on the head, but waited for Naruto to talk. "I'm just thinking about something." namely my contract to Shin. Naruto said, keeping the last part to himself. Kushina nodded and turned her head forward. Naruto sighed and merely kept walking with the two. Jiraiya seemed to notice the interaction between the two, but ignored it. Mother and son situations were best if they were worked out themselves, and he'd rather not do anything that would have Kushina target his wall again. So Jiraiya just calmly stayed out of it for now. For hours later, evidently the entire trip had been uneventful. The sun was now high in the sky, and it was quite hot for everyone. No one found anything to talk about other than casual conversation, but it was then that Naruto decided to try and break the ice when he wanted to know something interesting. So Ka-san, you never told me. How could you do the Kage Bunshin without hand signs? Naruto asked while Jiraiya's eyebrow twitched, showing that he wanted to know also. Kushina giggled at the sudden question, but knowing her son, she knew it would come sooner or later. So you want to know that? Well, I'll say that I had a knack for it, or better said that the Kage Bunshin complemented my unique chakra. Just like I showed you I had chakra chains, it turned out that my control of the Kage Bunshin wasn't so normal either. At first, like you, I had to cross my fingers and yell, but after a while I was able to do it by thinking it. The trick is to release your chakra and turn it into what you want. If you want to clone, then think it and think the number. You also have to measure how much chakra to put into the clone to make it more durable. If you want to learn it, then I'll show you Naruto. Kushina said, and Naruto's eyes gleamed before he raised an eyebrow. He hadn't noticed all those weeks, so he had to ask. Why are you calling me Naruto? Naruto asked, and Kushina smiled. She wasn't aware of the situation already planted in Naruto's mind and quickly hugged him, making the blonde blush in embarrassment. Because it's cute, Databane, Kushina said, and Naruto gulped. Yep, this really wasn't good, but he'd deal. He always has and always will. Unknown to the three, someone was looking over them and slightly chuckled. Enjoy yourself, Naruto Uzumaki. You have no idea of the destiny that awaits you as the first human Shinigami, the Shinigami said, and then faded into nothingness. 3 days later, Naruto, Kushina, and Jiraiya continued to walk towards Tea Country for their mission, which was to protect the daimyo's treasury from some kind of thieves that were targeting it. Some of the awkwardness that was there at the start of the trip was gone after those 3 days of walking and talking. Naruto had forgotten that incident somewhat, but it was rather hard to do with Kyuubi constantly reminding him. While they traveled, Kushina taught Naruto more of her kenjutsu and taijutsu, and she was more than pleased that the result of the seals on her son's body were working better than she could imagine. As she always knew, Naruto was a fast learner, and he had the bruises and aches to prove it. But even in his one day off, the blonde was still learning about chakra control from Jiraiya, as the Sannin gave him books to read, which Naruto pouted and Kushina giggled, since she shared the same dislike for books just like her son. Currently, they had just arrived in Tea Country and the sun was going down. Everyone finally sighed and stopped near a restaurant. They saw many people conversing and walking the pretty light-filled streets. Finally here. So when do we meet this daimyo? Naruto asked while he sat on the ground. Jiraiya sighed and took out the mission scroll and looked through its contents. We can meet with him after we get something to eat. Why don't you two get something and I'll set up the hotel? Jiraiya said while Naruto and Kushina turned to each other, then gave Jiraiya their individual blank stares. Aren't you going to be hungry? Kushina asked, and Jiraiya grinned as he walked away. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he saw Jiraiya's retreating form and sighed when he heard the man's reply. Oh, don't worry about me. I'll simply meet up with you guys in the next hour, Jiraiya said, giggling while he walked away. It was now Kushina's turn to sigh when she remembered that back when she was alive, Tea Country was quite famous for its brothels, and knowing Jiraiya, that was kind of easy to figure out. Oh well, Sochi, let's get something to eat now, Kushina said, walking into the restaurant while Naruto got to his feet and followed in after her. The restaurant was rather quaint looking, but they weren't in the mood to be picky. Kushina sat at a table and Naruto sat across from her. Both were given menus and ordered some good-looking food. They were still rather tired, so neither was in the mood to eat anything big. Naruto simply ate some soup with a couple of sandwiches, while Kushina had the same thing. It was a rather simple dinner, and not much conversation was going around, but for different reasons between the mother and son duo. Naruto, no matter how hard he tried, couldn't forget that night when he felt a small attraction to his mother. He knew he was the only one feeling this way. But Kushina, if given enough time, would pick up some of the hints, and that worried Naruto slightly. He looked up from his meal to see Kushina quietly eating her food, and he unconsciously examined her again. His eyes looked at her creamy-looking skin of her face, and then noticed her long, beautiful, red hair. He could really see why his father could fall for such a woman. But what worried him was that just maybe he was starting to also. He had always thought that he liked Sakura, but somewhere in the back of his mind he knew he was deluding himself. He remembered how hard Sakura cried when Sasuke had woken up from that coma that Itachi put him in. Naruto sighed when he also remembered the multiple times that Sakura did hit and berate him. He wasn't oblivious to it also. He wasn't sure why he always allowed it, but he felt that maybe Sakura would come around someday. I guess that was a dream also, Naruto thought, and sighed before he looked at his mother again. Even though it was soup and some sandwiches Kushina was eating with some grace that made Naruto compare her to Sakura, and then the blonde chuckled that it was ridiculous, mainly because he couldn't compare Sakura to his mother. Sakura lacked all the things that made Kushina look amazing. He could have chalked that up to Sakura still having a childlike body, but he knew that even if she was older, she still wouldn't compare to his mother. That long red hair, the creamy skin, and the just amazing presence she exuded. Kushina felt her son's eyes on her as she ate, and truth be told, she was rather embarrassed by it. She wasn't sure why he was looking at her so intently, but she figured that Naruto was still coming to terms that she was alive and in front of him. Kushina mentally smiled when she thought that. She was rather happy also that she could be with him like this. For all those years, she wondered what it was like to be with her son, and when Minato wanted to make him a Jinchuriki, Kushina felt such unparalleled sadness. But Naruto grew up to be a fine young man in her eyes. Naruto looked so much like Minato that the resemblance was uncanny, but Kushina wouldn't dare compare Naruto to Minato in any other way than appearance. Naruto wasn't Minato. He was Naruto, and he was going to stay that way. Kushina decided to break Naruto's gaze and looked up from her food. "Is something bothering you, Naruto-kun?" Kushina asked, and Naruto quickly stopped his staring and blushed in embarrassment. He had been caught looking at his mother, or maybe she knew all along, but didn't say anything to him. Nothing really, Ka-san. I am done with my food, so I'm going to go," Naruto said, quickly getting up and left the restaurant. Kushina frowned when she saw Naruto leave. It's like the blonde was avoiding her for some reason. Kushina looked at her son's plate and saw that he still had a few sandwiches left. She looked at her own plate and saw she was just about finished, which shows that she was the one relatively eating. "Sochi, what's wrong with you?" Kushina wondered as she placed some money on the table and walked out of the restaurant to meet up with Jiraiya. With Naruto. Naruto sighed as he walked through the streets. He was an idiot. He just ran out of the restaurant so fast before his mother could even respond. Maybe it was on the spur of the moment. He wasn't sure, but he could feel that he just made things a bit more complicated. "No kidding, brat. Now she's definitely going to be suspicious of you now," Kyubi said, and Naruto sighed with a nod. "It's not my fault," Naruto said, and Kyubi grinned like mad. He was still having so much fun as he toyed with his container. "Hey, you were the one checking her out. I'll admit that she's nice looking for a human, even if we have a I hate you, you hate me relationship," Kyubi said, and Naruto chuckled. He could see that. Kyubi and Kushina arguing every day about something that didn't even matter. "I'm sure I don't want to know," Naruto said, and Kyubi snorted then faded. Naruto wasn't sure if that was supposed to be a response or not, but he didn't care at the moment. After a few hours of aimless walking, Naruto came up to a large building and raised an eyebrow. He saw Jiraiya talking to someone and walked over. "Ero-sennin, what are you doing?" Naruto asked, bringing Jiraiya's attention to him. The Sannin's eyebrow twitched before he smacked Naruto up the head. "You damn brat. I told you not to call me that," Jiraiya yelled while Naruto rubbed his head. "You don't have to hit me, you damn pervert," Naruto said while Jiraiya sighed and turned back towards the man he was talking to. Sorry about that. Now, then when would you like us to start guarding the treasury? Jiraiya asked, and Naruto turned to the man in formal clothing. He gasped when he realized that Jiraiya was talking to the daimyo of Tea Country. Maybe the big building was his home. The daimyos always were fancy in most things. If at all possible, I would like you to begin tonight. I don't want any of those ninja getting to my stuff. I've already received threats on a constant basis, so I don't need to worry about any more things while I rule this country. The daimyo said, and Jiraiya nodded while Naruto watched the interaction between the two. Sounds like a real problem if they're targeting the daimyo only for his wealth. Maybe he did something, Kushina said, startling Naruto, which made him jump. He quickly turned around to see his mother and her smile, but he felt, or rather could sense, some sadness exuding from her, and he knew it was his fault. Jiraiya seemed to know, but didn't say anything. I haven't done anything. I've only been in office for a few months, the daimyo said, making Kushina sigh. All right, sorry. I didn't mean anything by it. Just wondering. So Jiraiya, when do we start? Kushina asked, and Jiraiya grinned like mad. Right now, we'll take a look at the interior of the place, and we'll plan from there. If they try to come, then we'll capture one person and have him lead us to the others, Jiraiya told them, making Naruto and Kushina nod. Let me show you all inside, the leader of Tea Country said as Jiraiya followed him inside. Kushina was going to walk, but Naruto grabbed her hand, making his mother look at him. Kasen, listen, I'm sorry I ran out like that. I just wanted to tell you that, Naruto said, and Kushina looked at him for a second. She could see he was really sorry, but he was also keeping something from her, though she was happy that he was talking to her. The last thing she wanted for the both of them to feel any awkwardness between them. It's all right, Naruto-kun. I'm sorry if I did something to make you leave, Kushina said as she sent her son a sincere smile. Naruto nodded with his own foxy grin as they walked inside the building. The sight they were greeted to shock them. The hallway was so exquisite and beautiful. Imported wood was used for most of it, while chandeliers hung from the ceiling to light up the room. They saw Jiraiya's sandals at the doorstep and took off their shoes also. After a bit of walking and admiring the place, Kushina and Naruto made it to Jiraiya, who was sitting on the couch. All right, he has left us in charge of the place and went to bed. I told it to be best if he went somewhere safe, but he said that this was the only place that felt that way, so there was nothing I can do, Jiraiya said, making Kushina and Naruto nod. So what's the plan? Naruto asked, ready to get the ball rolling. Jiraiya nodded and took out a map with the layout of the building. Well, I can hold my own against these guys, so you two will be a pair. For what the daimyo told me, they came at two major points, from the windows and the lower levels of the palace. Apparently his guards can't do anything to stop them, so that's where we come in. I'll stop them at the lower levels if they go down there while you two guard the windows. Keep your guard up, Jiraiya said and furled up the scroll. Naruto and Kushina nodded while Jiraiya walked away. You know, I feel sorry for anyone who fights Yukasen, Naruto said, and Kushina grinned before putting her shoes back on along with Naruto. I suppose, but you better not slack off just because I can back you up, Kushina replied, and Naruto rolled his eyes before nudging his mother's shoulder. Don't look down on me, Ka-san. Besides, I'm no pushover, Naruto said, and Kushina giggled. I suppose not. Well then, Naruto-kun, get started. We don't want to let them know we're here, Kushina stated as she turned out the lights. Naruto nodded and took up a hiding spot while he sent clones to the other floors to monitor the windows in those places. 5 hours later, Naruto sighed and rubbed his eyes. It was late, and they hadn't seen any instance of activity. He saw Kushina sitting down next to him while she was reading a small book. Naruto glanced at it and saw it was about creating jutsus that went well with Kinjutsu. He had asked her earlier why she didn't go off with his clones or in an individual room to be sure no one was inside, and Kushina told him that she was a talented sensor. She could sense even where Jiraiya was, and she would know if someone was going to one of the other places. Say, QB, can you sense anything? Naruto asked, making QB yawn while he tiredly opened one of his eyes. Yeah, they're coming. Your mother's sensor abilities reach the next few rooms, but I can tell they're outside. At least 10 are in front of the window. There are 2 where the perv is. You're lucky, Kit. The 2 below are A and B rank people. Anyone coming through the window is C ranked, which you'll be fine with dealing with, or at least you should be, QB said, turning silent. Naruto sighed and got to his feet, making his mother take her eyes off her book. What's wrong, Naruto-chan? Kushina asked, trying out a new name for her son, while Naruto grabbed his sword and tightened his grip. Kasan, get ready for a fight, Databayo, Naruto said, grinning like mad while Kushina got to her feet. Her son pointed outside, and Kushina concentrated her senses on that spot. She widened her eyes when she felt the 10 chakra signatures that Kyubi felt also. The redhead closed her book and put it away while she took out a kunai. It's been a while since I could do this. Let's see if I still got it, Kushina said to herself while Naruto unsheathed his sword. He felt a weird aura come off it, and he looked at the summoning contract on his hand, which glowed slightly before fading. Naruto narrowed his eyes and jumped to the ceiling while Kushina stayed behind a curtain. After another few minutes, the windows opened and the enemy appeared. Naruto narrowed his eyes while he stayed to the ceiling. He had spent time with his mother on his chakra control, and he got even better with it. Is everything ready? One of them asked the other. They had crossed out Kiri headbands, so that was obvious for the moment. Yep, those damn guards got what they deserved. Now let's raid this place, then we burn it like all the others. I don't see why we need those other 8 guys. We're more than enough to handle this, the other said, making the older one narrow his eyes. Stop complaining and get the job done. We have to raid this place before the daimyo wakes up. Who knows who he sent after our last 2 attempts were your fault, he said. Hey, it wasn't my fault. Those damn guards snuck up on me, and I had to kill them. Don't blame me, the younger said while the older sighed. Whatever, let's just go now, he said as he reached for the door that was connected to the hallway. But before he could turn the knob, Naruto jumped down and kicked him away into the wall, surprising the 2. You're a little late to be trying anything with us. Now, why don't you get lost before I kick your asses? Naruto said, making Kushina smile behind the curtain. She wouldn't come out just yet. She just wanted to see how well Naruto could actually do for now with the seals on. Well, looks like we have a brat trying to be tough. And he's a ninja, how nice. I knew today would be different, one of the bandits said, and Naruto grinned. He might have been feeling weighed down, but that wouldn't affect him for a little while. Naruto took the offensive stance that his mother taught him, while the 2 missing nin took out 2 chakra blades. So, it's going to be a sword fight, huh? Well, kid, you're out of luck. We were runner-ups in becoming some of Kiri's swordsmen. Even you should know how good Kiri is with their swords, the 2 Chunin-level nin said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes. He didn't care about any of that. Besides, he was being trained by an Kenjutsu legend, and that was more than enough for him. Well, then why don't you show me how good you are right now? Naruto yelled as he sent chakra to his feet and dashed at them. The younger Chunin blocked Naruto's strike with his blade and tossed a kick at the blonde, and Naruto widened his eyes in a sudden realization. This guy was slow. Too slow. Naruto could dodge so easily. His mother was so much faster and stronger. The blonde ducked under the kick before he sent his sword at the man's side, but he was stopped by the other Chunin nin and narrowed his eyes. Well, at least you can move well, the guy said, and Naruto grinned. He saw his mother watching him from behind the curtain and was going to show her that he would improve. Well, thank you. I have a great sensei, Naruto replied, dug into his pouch and threw a kunai at the older bandit, making the man duck. The blonde then turned and kicked the younger one out the window, making all their allies gasp as he was sent crashing into the ground. What the hell was that? Someone yelled, while everyone saw Naruto jump out of the palace. The blonde grinned and turned to the older one. Aren't you going to come to me also? Naruto asked, making the man grit his teeth before he chuckled with a vein in his head. Cheeky bastard, the guy said as his chakra blade glowed blue. This was the finest chakra blade he could get. It would make short work of the blonde idiot's sword. Naruto jumped into the air and threw a flame tag kunai at the man, but he dodged it easily as the kunai embedded itself on the wall. After a few seconds, it exploded, sounding the alarms throughout the palace. Naruto crossed his fingers and yelled, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. The blonde yelled, making 3 clones. Get the daimyo out of the building. I'll handle this, Naruto said to his clones. They nodded and ran off before he heard the 2 others smirk. Kid your way out of your league. In case you don't know it, but you're surrounded, the man said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes, allowing his hair to cover over them. Not really. It's just you 2 and me. Ka-san can take care of the rest, Naruto said, making the 2 men laugh out loud. Oh, this kid is funny. He still needs his mama to do things for him. To think I almost respected him, the older guy said while the younger laughed. Naruto just kept up his grin as he saw someone sheath their sword. That wasn't any fun at all, Databane, Kushina said as the 2 turned around to see all 8 of their comrades on the ground while the redhead flipped her hair. I should have gone with Jiraiya. Maybe he's having fun right now, Kushina said, making the 2 grit their teeth as Naruto's sword glowed. The blonde raised an eyebrow, and the summoning contract on his hand glowed even more, making the blonde shield his eyes. Kushina stared at Naruto's sword, and so did the 2 Chunin-level bandits as Naruto closed in on them, his hair covering his eyes. His body wasn't radiating any Ki, and yet he had the feeling of death all around him. Naruto raised his head, showing his eyes to be slightly silver along the outside of his cerulean eyes. He bit his thumb and traced it over his seal. Kuchios no Jutsu, Naruto said, and he didn't have to turn around. The reactions from the 2 were enough to know they were staring at the Shinigami. What is this kid? The older one said while Shin turned to Naruto. Time for you to learn the first part of being a human Shinigami, Shin said, and Naruto nodded. The blonde dashed forward with his sword, but the 2 guys blocked it before Naruto landed to the ground. He felt so light on his feet right now. It was like his mother's seals weren't even affecting him in the least. Naruto appeared behind the 2 while he slashed his sword forward. The younger brother blocked the blonde's attack, but something was wrong. Their swords were the best, and Naruto's sword wasn't supposed to be this good against Akiri's sword. It should have broke long ago. What is that sword made out of? The younger said as he backflipped away from the blonde. He huffed, and Naruto's smile widened. It wasn't evil, but it was good. It was the smile of someone just happy to be living. The blonde turned to his surprised mother and grinned. Ka-san, I'm going to keep improving, and I'm going to show you how good I am, Naruto said as he blurred out of sight. He wasn't sure what it was, but Shin was affecting him in some way. Even Kyuubi was up and watching the fight unfold. Naruto appeared behind the younger Nin, and his sword pierced his stomach. The older shinobi gasped as Naruto twisted the sword through the younger one's body as he separated it. Kushina widened her eyes as she saw a small white humanoid-looking thing next to Naruto. Slice through it, Naruto-sama. This is the first step to being a human Shinigami, Shin said, and Naruto did so. He slashed through the figure, and before long, it was absorbed into his sword while the man's body dropped to the floor. Naruto's sword glowed even more, and the blonde smiled. You, what did you do? The older Nin asked, and Naruto was more than happy to reply to him. I sealed his soul into my sword. I see what Shin meant when he said that he wouldn't be using his blade anymore. He sent that energy into my sword, and now my sword is the essence of the Shinigami, or the sword of death, Naruto said, making the man grit his teeth. Damn you to hell, he said as he dashed at Naruto. The blonde brought his sword back and closed his eyes. You're already there, Databeo, the blonde said calmly and slashed forward. He opened his eyes to see the soul of the bandit in front of him and grinned. When he was younger, he remembered Sarutobi talking with some Umbu in his office about a certain jutsu involving the Shinigami. Naruto was real good at hiding since he could outrun Umbu even with his Kill Me orange jumpsuit. So Naruto slapped his hands together. I'm new to it, but this might work. Fuinjutsu, Shiki Fujin, Naruto yelled, and Shin gave a small smirk. The brat was full of surprises. So you heard of that jutsu? Normally I'd take your soul, but our contract states I can't, so you're free, Shin said as he grabbed the soul of the man and sealed it into the pot, never to be revived again. The area was vacant while Naruto turned to the Shinigami. So, are you going to train me now? Naruto asked, and the Shinigami looked at the sword in the blonde's hand. That's right. You've passed. I wanted you to use the blade as a rite of passage. Now your training will begin, Shin said, and Naruto nodded before the spirit disappeared. Naruto turned to his shocked mother, who still couldn't get over it. Her son was the summoner to the Shinigami. The thought itself was scary enough. Kushina walked up to her son and looked at him. You're just full of surprises, Kushina said, and Naruto looked at the ground. He sheathed his sword like he was almost disappointed in himself for doing this in front of his mother. You aren't mad at me? Naruto asked. The last thing he wanted was for his mother to reject him also because of another scary power that came to him. His reply was Kushina bringing him into a tight hug, making the blonde gasp. How could I be mad at my son? I was a little worried about you, but you handled everything perfectly. Never think I hate you, Naruto. You're my son after all. Your kinjutsu could use some work, but you did it, Kushina said, and Naruto wrapped his arms around his mother. Cough, cough. Are we having a moment? Jiraiya said, shocking the two. He had two tied-up people and sighed. He never thought they'd be that easy. They were supposed to be A-ranked missing Nin, but as Jiraiya had found out, they were only lying so no one would get in their way. Bunch of idiots. No wonder Jiraiya took them down so fast. Was that it? I mean, we're done, right? Naruto asked, and Jiraiya nodded while rubbing the back of his head. Well, let's just be happy that we got through everything without a hitch. I saw Naruto's clones rescue the daimyo. He's outside at the moment, so let's take these two to him and he'll decide what happens, Jiraiya said, and the two Uzumaki nodded and went to the daimyo. They saw the man out in his lawn and came to him. Here you go, Daimyo-sama. It didn't take long as we thought it would. They were just some shinobi bandits all around Chunin level. Here are the two leaders of the assault, Jiraiya said, and the daimyo got up. Thank you, Jiraiya-sama. I'll go inform Hokage-sama of this success when I send a messenger to Konoha, the daimyo said, making Jiraiya, Kushina, and Naruto bow with their thanks as they left. So what now? Naruto asked, making Jiraiya scoff. I'm going to bed. You can do whatever you want, Brad, Jiraiya replied, heading for the hotel. Meanwhile, Kushina and Naruto stayed out in the streets, just watching the old sage retire to his room. Anything you want to do, Ka-san? Naruto asked, and Kushina shrugged her shoulders. She then yawned, and Naruto grinned. I guess it's late. Let's go to bed, Naruto said, and opened a door. Kushina followed him, and the night was laid away by the group of three and them completing their first mission together. Next morning. Gammon Naruto. Your kinjutsu is good, but it still leaves room for improvement, Kushina said, and Naruto sighed for like the 10th time since they woke up. This just wasn't fair at all. Jiraiya had gone off somewhere, while Kushina and Naruto continued with the blonde's lesson in kinjutsu and taijutsu. Ka-san, you're not fair at all, Naruto said, laying on the ground. Kushina giggled a little more while the sweat dropped on Naruto's face. Kushina laid next to Naruto and watched him relax from her training. She could only imagine him in the next few years. He'd be quite the man when she was done with him. It was then that Kushina smelled something and her nose pinpointed it to Naruto. She was smelling her son's sweat from their training. He had a weird smell to his body, but it was intoxicating to her. The red-headed habanero caught herself and stood to her feet. What was she doing? She couldn't be acting like this. Naruto turned to see his mother looking weird and raised an eyebrow. Ka-san, are you all right? Naruto asked, and Kushina slightly jumped from his question. Yes, Naruto, I'm fine. Why do you ask? Kushina countered, and Naruto narrowed his eyes. Were you breathing heavily and you didn't call me? Never mind, Naruto said as he whistled away. Kushina glared at her son for a bit before she sighed. Sorry, I'm probably just thinking too much, she replied, and Naruto seemed to accept that for the moment. Naruto then just laid in the plains and sighed. Ka-san, I'm glad you're back, Naruto said, and Kushina wondered what brought that one. But she didn't complain about it at all. Despite her thinking, she hugged Naruto, making the blonde widen his eyes. Well, we have you to thank for that. Trust me, Naruto-kun, I'm not going anywhere, Kushina said, and Naruto knew that she wasn't lying. She was too much of a woman to do that. Thank you, Ka-san. When we go back to Konoha, what are you going to do? Naruto asked her, and Kushina put the tip of her finger before smiling. I'm going to pay a visit to Tsunade, get some explanations, and maybe get you to our house in Konoha, which I told him you should get. But apparently no one listened, Kushina said with a dark chuckle. Naruto gulped before Kushina stood to her feet. Well, Sochi, come on. We've got 2 years to make this work, and I'm going to teach you until you can't move, Kushina said, and Naruto sighed. That was his mother, and he wasn't complaining. 2 years later. Sigh. How long am I going to be writing these damn documents? I swear this job doesn't get any easier, Tsunade said, slumping her shoulders. It was then that Shizen came through the door with a smile. Today's the day, isn't it, Tsunade-sama? Shizen asked, and Tsunade grinned. She looked out the window and off into the distance. Time for that brat to come home? That's right. My stress is totally going to increase, but I don't understand this note that Jiraiya sent me, Tsunade said, giving it to Shizen to read. To Tsunade. Tsunade-ham, I'm glad I got to you. We're arriving to Konoha soon, and I just want to tell you one thing. Run. She's coming. Get out of there now. This is the bad day to be you. I got my beating, now it's your turn, but run. Jiraiya. Shizen looked at the note and raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you're in danger, Shizen said, while Tsunade scoffed. Like anything could be dangerous to me. Did you forget who I am? Tsunade asked while Shizen shook her head at her master. She was still going to be weary of this note, just in case. Well, anyway, I guess it's time to go, Tsunade said, getting up from her seat and walking for the door. That's right. We can't keep them waiting, can we? Shizen asked as she left also. Near Konoha. 3 people were walking towards Konoha. One was the more recognizable Jiraiya in his usual clothes. The next was a woman about 30 who was wearing a long-sleeve blouse with a t-shirt under it. Her hair was red and slid down her slender form. It was Kushina Uzumaki, Naruto's mother, and speaking of the blonde, Kyubi Jinchuriki. He was now taller with his blonde hair, showing 2 small bangs on the side of his face. He was wearing a black obi shirt and black pants. On his arm were small black guards that covered that portion of his arm and the seal over his hand. It was all complete with an orange sash that was wrapped around his waist and some black shoes. On his right was his sword that he had used for those 2 years. Finally back. Man, this place hasn't changed at all, Naruto said as they came up to the village gates. The 2 gate guards, Izumo and Kotetsu, looked up and smiled. Hey, isn't that dash? Izumo started, but didn't finish as he got a nod from his buddy Kotetsu. That's right, but who's the woman with him? Kotetsu asked, but Izumo shook his head. It really hasn't changed at all. Well, except for the Hokage faces, but that's to be expected, right, Naruto? Kushina asked, getting a nod for Naruto as they walked through the village. With Sakura. Sakura continued to walk through the village on a supply check for Tsunade and went about her way until she saw her master and Shizen walking towards the village gates. Tsunade-sama, Shizen-san, where are you going? Sakura asked, making Tsunade and Shizen gasp at her, which in turn made Sakura raise an eyebrow. What did I say? Sakura asked, and Shizen giggled while Tsunade shook her head. Don't you know what today is? Tsunade asked, and Sakura narrowed her eyes. She thought it over for a second, and after some, though, she widened her eyes in realization before slumping her shoulders. How could I forget that? Is he here yet? Sakura asked, and Tsunade grinned like mad while shrugging her shoulders. Not sure, but he'll be here soon, Tsunade said, and she, Shizen, and Sakura walked off towards the gates of Konoha. With Naruto. The group of 3 continued to walk the trees as Naruto took in the sights. He saw nothing had changed at all since he was last here. Hey, look, it's boss, someone said, and Naruto turned around to see Konohamaru and his group right along with Tsunade, Shizen, and Sakura. Hey, Konohamaru, how you been? Naruto asked as he ruffled his hair. Konohamaru grinned as he hugged his rival. I've been good, he responded, making Naruto smile. Hey, brat. You've grown up. Not to mention your fashion sense has really improved, Tsunade said while Naruto grinned like mad. He brushed a hand through his hair and smiled. Well, I thought it deserved a change, Naruto said, making Tsunade nod. It was then that they heard chuckling, which made Naruto and Jiraiya gulp. Tsunade turned to the woman next to Naruto and widened her eyes. Finally, I finally get to see you. How have you been, Tsunade? Please come over here so I can talk with you about something, Kushina said, sharpening her blade while Tsunade backed away. Shizen gasped while Sakura raised an eyebrow. Who's this? And why is she holding her sword like that? Sakura asked while everyone backed away from the Ki that was penetrating the air, making it thick. 2 years. I've waited for 2 years to see you, Tsunade, and I just want to catch up, right? Kushina asked while Tsunade turned to Jiraiya, who simply bowed to her and wished her luck. But how? Why you should be dead? Well, that's an interesting story for another time. Now, then you with the pink hair, please move right now, Kushina said, advancing on Tsunade, while Sakura got a tick mark. Hey, listen, you can't talk to Tsunade-sama like that, Sakura said, while Tsunade, Jiraiya, Naruto, and Shizen were mentally yelling for Sakura to shut her trap for once. Kushina turned to Sakura, who steeled her gaze at the redhead, narrowed her eyes. Sakura-chan, maybe you should get out of the way now, Naruto said while Sakura gazed over at him. Shut it, Naruto Baka. I don't need your advice to handle this, Sakura said, and the air just got colder around her. Kushina chuckled even more as she found a secondary target. You're Sakura, aren't you? Kushina asked, and Sakura nodded, still locking eyes with the woman. That's right, she said while Kushina took a deep breath and cracked her neck. Okay, that's all I wanted to know, Kushina said as she unsheathed her sword. The entire village watched the two square off, and Kushina smiled. Then I'll have to tell you this. In my presence, don't call my son an idiot, and if you ever hit him again like I've been told then, I'll kill you, Kushina said in the simplest tone, which made Sakura gulp, and she realized that her life was in danger. Now, then as I was saying, Tsunade, tell me why you didn't tell Naruto about his heritage, and tell me why he's not living at our house like I told you, and Sarutobi, and tell me why you didn't help raise him like you, and Jiraiya said you would. Kushina said while Tsunade backed away. She turned to Shizen for help, but she was on the other side of the road, and Tsunade gasped before turning back. And now, Kushina, I don't know how you're back, but let's see calm down and talk this out, okay? Tsunade asked while Kushina stopped walking. I just met you, but the time for talk is over. Now is the time for punishment. Jiraiya received his, and now you will receive yours. You can run, but I will catch you, Kushina said, and on that note Tsunade added chakra to her feet and jumped off, but she was quickly brought back by a chain attached to her leg as it slowly pulled her back. See, I said you could run, but now you're so kind as to stay. How noble of you, Tsunade. Now then, please let's go somewhere and talk, Kushina said as she walked away and into a small alleyway. Tsunade's teeth chattered against each other as she was dragged away. Shizen, help me, Tsunade yelled out, but Shizen gulped and bowed. Forgive me, Tsunade-sama, Shizen said quietly as the small darkness overwhelmed the alleyway. Ah! Tsunade yelled, making the entire village shiver. Naruto, who is that woman? Sakura asked, trying to stop her body from shaking, while Naruto sighed and rubbed the back of his head along with Shizen and Jiraiya, who were praying to Kami for Tsunade's safety. She's my mother, Kushina Uzumaki, or the Red Death of Konoha, Naruto said, and Sakura widened her eyes. She's way out of my league, Sakura thought as the various screams of Tsunade filled the village. Yep, Naruto was back in Konoha, and he brought a big surprise to them. Tsunade sat behind her desk, rubbing her forehead of the giant lump on her head, while standing behind her desk was Sakura with a smaller lump, Jiraiya, and Naruto along with Shizen. Well, that was a nice talk, right, Tsunade? Kushina asked, and Tsunade cried a little more. She had to hate her life right now. This just so wasn't fair. Tsunade turned to Naruto and narrowed her eyes at the blonde. It's just one headache after another with you. You aren't even back for 10 minutes, and I want you to leave again, Tsunade thought before finally deciding to talk. She really wanted to get off that little nightmare she had a few minutes ago. Well, that aside, and the complete shock of seeing Kushina, I guess it's good to see you, brat, Tsunade said, and Naruto nodded in agreement with her. He was more than happy to see his village again. It's good to see you too, Bachan, Naruto responded, and Tsunade grew a tick mark on her herd. It seems he still couldn't give her the respect she wanted, but somewhere in her heart, she was happy that he hadn't changed in the least over those years. Well, his attire was an improvement. He really looked quite capable in that entire black outfit. So, I hope you haven't been wasting his time, Jiraiya, Tsunade said, which made the Toad Sage scoff at his old teammate. Please, do you really think so low of me, Tsunade? The brat knows more than a thing or two, Jiraiya said, and in all honesty, he wasn't kidding. He knew that if Naruto would fight someone, then it would be quite a shock of what the blonde could do. After all, he was trained under Kushina and himself, so it had to really count for something. That's right, Bachan. I've gotten wicked strong. I might even be able to take you on, Naruto said, making Kushina giggle while Tsunade and Sakura rolled their eyes. They could see that the blonde was still confident as ever. Yes, well, it's really good to see you confident. So, Jiraiya, what rank should we give Naruto? I don't know how well he's improved, and keeping him a genin doesn't seem right, so what do you suggest we do? Tsunade asked, and the sage thought it over before turning to see Sakura and Naruto looking at him. Yeah, that could work. Well, it's important to have teamwork, so why don't you have Naruto and Sakura fight against one of your jonin? Jiraiya asked, and Tsunade's grin got bigger before she closed her eyes. I see. Well, I guess our volunteer was listening in, Tsunade said, and immediately there was a knock on the door. Everyone turned around to see Shikamaru and Temari come through the door, and it took the Nara a bit of time to recognize the blonde in front of him. Hey, you're Naruto. Man, it's good to see you. How have you been? Shikamaru asked, and Naruto smirked as he walked towards the next Nara clan head. I've been good, Shikamaru. How have you been? Still lazy? Naruto asked, and Shikamaru rubbed the back of his head with a sigh. Hey, this job is troublesome, and I still don't like it. I'd rather be watching the clouds, Shikamaru said, making everyone in the room sweat drop. To Kushina, it only reminded her remembering how Yoshino was with most lazy boys. It was then that Shikamaru pointed to Temari. And I'm sure you remember this person, Shikamaru said, and Naruto turned to her. The blonde grinned and nodded. Only one girl I know has that hairstyle, right, Temari? Naruto asked, making Temari smile at the blonde. He really did change from the weird kid she remembered back during the Chunin exams. It's good to see you too, Naruto. It really shows that you've changed if you remember me, Temari said, and soon everyone heard the sound of some clap and turned to see Tsunade. I'll leave the greetings for later. Right now, the person you want to fight is expecting you, Tsunade said, and Naruto nodded. Then tell Kakashi-sensei that I'm ready to have some fun when he comes in, Naruto said, making Tsunade widen her eyes. That only served to make Kushina giggle. She hadn't only been teaching Kenjutsu to Naruto, and she could hardly wait to see him fight with all she showed him. How did you know that? Tsunade asked, and Naruto grinned while Sakura looked at him like he just grew a second head. I told you I got stronger, so why don't you send him inside? Naruto asked, and Tsunade waved her hand. Soon Kakashi came inside, just like Naruto thought, and while his gaze was apathetic, he still held a small amount of surprise. But then he looked to see the redhead across from Naruto, and Kakashi gasped so much that it made him drop his precious book. Why, Wayuru, but how are you even? It's impossible, Kakashi said, making Kushina giggle. It's a real interesting story. It's something Naruto should tell you, not me, Kushina said, and suddenly Naruto felt everyone stare at him with all intent on knowing what the blonde did while Naruto glared at his mother. Kasan, that's not funny, Naruto said while Kushina just kept her amused grin on her face. However, it didn't take long for Kakashi to turn to Naruto and picked up his book. Well, you're different. Well, then are you any good? Kakashi asked, and Naruto smiled. I sure am, Dadabayo. Oh, but before we get into it, I thought you might like a gift. I have no need for it, and even if I did, then my mother would beat me to a pulp. So here you go, Naruto said, reaching into his pouch as he took out a book and gave it to the Jonin. Kakashi widened his eyes as he cried tears of joy. It's not possible, Kakashi said as he felt like he was in the presence of Kami himself as he opened the book. While Jiraiya grinned. Yes, that's right. It is a work of art after all. No one could understand how magnificent it is, Jiraiya said, and Tsunade would have glared at him, but something worse was watching him. Jiraiya, why does my Naruto have that book? Kushina asked, and the Toad Sage gulped before turning around to see Kushina, just smiling, but anyone who knew Kushina also knew that this smile was a terrible thing. I don't know, Jiraiya said as Kushina grabbed his shoulder. Then let me tell you something outside right now, Kushina said as she dragged a screaming Jiraiya away while everyone sighed. Tsunade chose to ignore it and sighed again. Kakashi, that's enough, Tsunade said, and Kakashi closed the book just as easily as he opened it. Well, then I can't wait to see how you and Sakura still work together, Naruto. But you must be tired, so we'll give you a chance to rest, then we'll fight it out, Kakashi said, and Naruto rose an eyebrow. I'm fine. I've had plenty of rest, and I'm ready to go, Naruto said, and Sakura nodded in agreement with him. Kakashi turned to them and raised an eyebrow. Nonsense, you should just rest for a bit. I'll see you later, Kakashi told them and immediately shined off while everyone tried to contemplate what happened. He seemed to be in a hurry, Shizen said, making the obvious known. Can't wait to read that book. Sigh. Well, I'm gonna go now, Shikamaru said as he and Temari left the room, but not before seeing Kushina come back through the room, and on the floor was a beaten-up Jiraiya. Well, since Kakashi-sensei ran off, I guess you have the time. Then I guess you have the time. So Naruto, do you want to look around the village? Sakura asked, but Naruto sighed. Sorry, Sakura, but I've got some things to do. Like moving into my house, right, Tsunade-bachan? Naruto asked, and Tsunade sighed. She nodded and took out a map. Sarutobi-sensei left instructions to where the house was, and you should dash. Tsunade, do you really think I wouldn't know where my own house is? Come on, Sochi, let's get you settled in like you should have been, Kushina said, wrapping her body around Naruto's arm and dragging him off while Sakura glared. Is a mother always that free-loving with her son? Sakura asked, and Tsunade raised an eyebrow. Jealous? Tsunade asked, and Sakura huffed and rolled her eyes. Not in the least, Tsunade-sama, Sakura said to her master, which made Tsunade giggle at the thought of Sakura being jealous of Naruto's own mother. It was a strange concept to even think that. With Kushina and Naruto. Kushina continued to drag Naruto towards their house. The blonde noticed the vacant Uchiha compound as they passed it. He narrowed his eyes and sighed, but didn't dwell on it long. He had other responsibilities, and Sasuke wasn't one of them at the moment. It took a little while, but Kushina took Naruto into the woods, and after a few minutes they both came up to a house. It wasn't very large, but it wasn't small either. It seems to be the perfect blend of normal and exquisite. Not over the top, but definitely not ordinary. It's nice, Kasan. We even have a pond, Naruto said, and Kushina nodded. She came up to the house, and it showed seals preventing anyone from going inside. I'd do it, but you should do it, Naruto. Bite your thumb and trace it over the seal, Kushina told him, and Naruto nodded. The blonde bit his thumb and traced it over the seal. The seal glowed and then faded. Quickly, a large barrier appeared over the house and immediately vanished, allowing Naruto and Kushina their access to the house. Kushina opened the door and both walked inside. For Kushina, there was a small air of déjà vu for her, while Naruto walked around the house. He wondered how it was so clean when the house didn't allow anyone inside, but he'd figure that out later. He saw his mother looking around with a longing look, and the blonde frowned. Are you all right, Kasan? Naruto asked, and Kushina gave a gentle smile. I'm all right. Just reminiscing is all, Kushina said, and before long, she stared to give Naruto a grand tour of the entire place, which he should have known already, but hardly mattered anymore. While Kushina showed him around, Naruto made a Kage Bunshin to pack the things in his old apartment and move them into his house. The clone nodded, and left the room, leaving the mother and son alone. Well, everything seems to be in place. Nothing's changed at all. Well, Sochi, I guess I'll show you the rooms, Kushina said, and the blonde walked away with her. They walked up the stairs and came inside the master bedroom. The bed was really big, at least for two people to sleep comfortably. This should be your room now, Sochi. We have a guest room, so I'll just sleep there, Kushina said, and Naruto shook his head. No way, Kasen, I can't let you do that. You should just stay in here with me, Naruto said, and Kushina raised an eyebrow. She gave a small hint of a blush, but didn't know why she was. Are you sure about that? Kushina asked, and Naruto glared at her. I don't mind if you do. Besides, you slept with me for 2 years before this, so why should this be any different? Naruto asked, and Kushina thought that over. She wasn't sure how to answer that. She mainly did that because she always loved to hug her son, and she'd rather with her son that Jiraiya, since no place had bed for 3, and truth be told, she was kind of used to it. Well, I suppose it's all right. You can take that half, and I'll take this half of the bed, Kushina said, and Naruto nodded. They each sat on opposite ends of the bed and started to unseal their clothes and things to put away in the various shelves and drawers. So you're finally taking initiative after 2 years. How nice for you, and slow. I thought you were never going to try anything, Kyuubi suddenly said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes. I'm not trying anything. And what the hell do you mean by taking initiative? This is my mother, damn it, Naruto said, and Kyuubi chuckled at his container, acting flustered. Please, brat, mother or not, she a woman, and like any other woman, she has needs, got that? As far as I'm concerned, she's just related to you, if nothing else. What are you so worried about? Kyuubi asked, and Naruto sighed. He looked over his shoulder and gazed at his mother, combing her hair. The blonde gulped as he now realized the consequences of his actions. He was just trying to be polite to his mother, but now it turns into something like this. With all his training with the Shinigami, the blonde hadn't the time to ever try and act on his small feelings for his mother. Somewhere he was happy for that, but in the deeper places of his mind, he wasn't happy at all. He wasn't sure what he wanted from his mother, but he knew she wouldn't give it to him, or worse, that she would completely reject him, so Naruto kept it all to himself. He at least felt that was for the best. Great, Kyuubi, now I have to think like this, Naruto said while Kyuubi rolled his eyes at his container. He really wished that the blonde wasn't so damn cheeky. Whatever, brat. Just don't go insane with the closeness, or you're really going to have something to worry about then, Kyuubi said, and Naruto sighed. Naru-kun, did you hear me? Kushina suddenly asked, and the blonde turned to his mother. I'm sorry, what happened, Kasen? Naruto asked, and Kushina began again with a slight worry on her face. I said I'm going to cook us some lunch, so would you like anything? She asked, and Naruto nodded since he was feeling hungry too. So on that note, Kushina got up from her side of the bed and walked away from the room, leaving Naruto inside. Great, she's totally going to be worried about me now, Naruto said, and Kyuubi chuckled at his container unfortunate acts. Sigh, great, now what do I do? Naruto wondered, but then his clone came back with a scroll for all his stuff, and the blonde took it. He closed his eyes and concentrated. Kage Bunshin Jutsu, Naruto said in thought, and immediately 2 clones came out and started to put things away while Naruto walked down the stairs. The blonde walked out into the yard and took in the nice scenery for a bit. Well, I better get started, Naruto said, taking off his wrist guards, revealing the seal on his hand. He bit his thumb and traced blood over it. Kuchios no Jutsu, Naruto yelled, and immediately Shin appeared behind the blonde and narrowed his eyes at his summoner. So you're ready to continue? The Shinigami asked, and Naruto nodded. He took out his sword and took his mother's taijutsu stance. He quickly saw his sword glow in the same white light that he had seen so many times with its strange glow. The blonde gripped his sword and concentrated all his chakra into it. The sword glowed brighter, making Naruto shield his eyes while the Shinigami watched. Focus, Naruto-sama. Using spiritual fire requires a great deal on concentration, Shin said to the blonde. For those 2 years, he had taught Naruto how to become the human Shinigami that Shin said he would be. Naruto had learned many techniques that involved his sword thanks to Kushina and Shin. In terms of what Shin told him, Then there was the one scroll that Shin gave Naruto that showed Naruto every technique he would need to learn in order to be a human Shinigami. Naruto had learned about 5 to 7 different techniques due to their difficulty, but he had a lot more to do. Naruto gritted his teeth as his sword shined even more. He huffed as before he dropped the sword, and the glow immediately stopped. The blonde cursed and looked at his hands, which had small burns on them. "Damn, that hurt," Naruto said while the Shinigami nodded. Spirit flames weren't a joke. They burn a lot more than regular fire, and while it wasn't as hot, it still hurt when it engulfed you just like any normal fire. "Keep at it. You have to do it," Shin said, and Naruto picked up his sword. He gripped it and allowed it to glow again. "I'll get this down. I know I have to," Naruto said before dropping his sword again from the burning on his hands. "Kyuso," Naruto yelled out before he tried again. A few hours later, Sakura sighed as she stayed at the gate where they were supposed to meet up. She expected the lateness from Kakashi, but Naruto was a new one on her. He also seemed slightly distant. She had noticed that one time when he didn't call her Sakura-chan like he always did. It unnerved the pink-haired Kunoichi slightly that maybe Naruto had changed too much. "Hey, Sakura," someone yelled, and the Kunoichi looked up to see Naruto walking toward her. His hands seemed slightly burned, but he bandaged them up just as fine. "You're late, and what happened to your hands?" she asked, and Naruto grinned before sheepishly rubbing the back of his head. "It's nothing major. Is Kakashi-sensei not here yet?" Naruto asked, and Sakura shook her head. "No, he isn't," she responded, and Naruto narrowed his eyes as he leaned on the gate. Meanwhile, Sakura took in the blonde's appearance and could tell that he looked better in black than anything else. She would even say that he was good-looking. Naruto, on the other hand, was thinking about how to perfect his sword techniques, along with him trying to figure out the feelings for his mother that he tried to suppress over the years, which was difficult due to Kyuubi's ramblings. "I'm just speaking the truth. Don't put this on me," Kyuubi responded while Naruto sighed in thought. Soon a poof made them jump as they turned around to face their sensei. "Yo," Kakashi said while Naruto narrowed his eyes at his sensei. "Keep that up, Kakashi-sensei, and one day it will be the biggest mistake of your life," Naruto said as he walked into the training ground. But what was weird was the fact that Naruto's eyes showed a small shimmer of death on Kakashi, which made the Jonin mentally gulp. Behind some trees were Kushina, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Shizen, who decided to watch them all fight. "So do you think that Naruto can beat Kakashi?" Tsunade asked, and Kushina giggled. "He's my son. Of course he can, and I bet that he'll get him in the most unexpected way to any of you," Kushina said, and with that everyone decided to pay attention and watch with interest what she was talking about. Naruto and Sakura stood across from Kakashi while the Jonin held up 2 bells. Naruto narrowed his eyes, while Sakura smirked while putting on her gloves. "All right, we're here. Now then, rules are the same as last time. Come at me with the intent to kill, or you won't get these bells," Kakashi said, making Naruto and Sakura nod. The blonde sighed and cracked his knuckles. He couldn't wait for what he had planned for Kakashi. "We know that already, Databeo," Naruto said, and Sakura nodded with him. "Don't think little of us, Kakashi-sensei, or you're going to get hurt," Sakura said, making Kakashi give an eye smile. "We'll see," Kakashi responded as he closed his eyes. The wind blowed around them, all making their hair sway. Kakashi grabbed his headband and lifted it up. "Now we'll make this a little harder," Kakashi said to them with Naruto and Sakura grinning like mad. "All right, Kakashi. If we're going that far, then I will too," Naruto said as he closed his eyes. Sakura raised an eyebrow, and so did Kakashi while Kushina and Jiraiya grinned, but Tsunade and Shizen were confused. "What's he doing?" Tsunade asked while Kushina grinned. "Don't worry about that, and just watch," Kushina said as Naruto opened his eyes. They didn't change, and there was no special feature about them. But the blonde smirked anyway, while the air around him became cold. Naruto's ki instantly raised, making Sakura gulp. "Ready, Kakashi-sensei?" Naruto asked as he grabbed his sword. His love to do this to people. It was known as the Sure no Shinsun, which was taught to him by the Shinigami over his 2-year training period. It was a technique that more or less didn't rely on Ki, but enhanced it to the point of the person looking at it was almost staring at their own death. Naruto remembered his own experience with it also. Flashback. Naruto stood in the middle of the field and turned to see Shin facing him. The blonde would learn the first technique to becoming a Shinigami, which was to have the presence of one. All right, Naruto-sama, I'm going to show you the first technique as a Shinigami. Keep in mind that you needn't be afraid too much, but I'll try and bring it to a low level if I can, Shin said, and used to gaze on Naruto. The blonde widened his eyes and immediately fell to the ground. His breathing hitched and his body trembled. He hadn't felt anything like this since Zabuza. Shin soon stopped, and Naruto breathed easily. Damn it, I felt like you were going to kill me for a second, Naruto said, and Shin nodded. That's the first step. To be a Shinigami is to appear to have the presence of one. Never forget that, Shin said, and the blonde nodded. It took Naruto 3 weeks to be able to handle the technique and about 5 weeks to be able to use it effectively. In flashback, Kakashi's body trembled before Naruto lessened the gaze a bit for him to at least breathe easily. Something wrong, Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked before Kakashi snapped out of his stupor. He looked at Naruto and narrowed his eyes like his mind just registered the blonde as a full-on threat. No, it's nothing. Begin, Kakashi said, and Naruto quickly erased the distance between him and Kakashi, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Sakura widened her eyes, and even Kakashi did also. I'm taking those bells, Naruto said as he aimed for a punch at Kakashi, but the Jonin somehow managed to block it as he sent a kick at Naruto's face. But the blonde only chuckled, and in a flash of speed Naruto punched Kakashi, making the Jonin skid back a few feet. Kushina and Jiraiya grinned, while Shizune and Tsunade showed utter surprise. They didn't expect Kakashi to get hit so fast. Naruto cracked his knuckles and glared at Kakashi while the Jonin rubbed his side. Here, I come, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said as he blurred out of sight. Kakashi widened his eyes as Naruto appeared behind him. He's so fast, Kakashi thought, and Naruto was in amazement as well. He never had such a chance to go this fast before. His mother's training was extreme, but got the job done. Naruto tried to grab the bells, but Kakashi spun his body and quickly turned away from Naruto. It was then that he dodged another punch from a clone, making the Jonin gasp. When did he make a Kage Bunshin? Kakashi wondered as Naruto and his clone backflipped away from him. Hey Sakura, don't you want to crack at Kakashi-sensei? Naruto asked, which broke Sakura out of her stupor of watching the fight. She could barely see Naruto as it was, so when the blonde called her, she was surprised, but she could admire the blonde later. All right, here I come, Kakashi-sensei, Sakura said, but before she could move into action, Kakashi disappeared, making Sakura curse. Damn it, where'd he go? Sakura wondered while Naruto chuckled. This would be so much fun after all. In Suna, 2 members wearing red cloaks were coming up to the village, and both looked inside it. They narrowed their eyes and grinned as they appeared. So this is where the Ichibi Jinchuriki lives, one with blonde hair said while the other spoke in a gruff voice. That's right. Deidara, are you sure that what you have in that pouch is enough for him? He asked while the other grinned before putting his hands in his pouch. You don't need to worry about that, Sasori, my man, Deidara said while Sasori rolled his eyes. Deidara took some clay in his hands and threw it at the ground, creating a giant bird. Deidara jumped on the giant clay bird and flew into the air to infiltrate the sand village. Meanwhile, the Kazekage was in his office, signing some documents before he turned and looked at the sky. He narrowed his eyes and instantly got up from his seat. It was then that his former sensei, Baki, came through the door. Lord Kazekage, is everything all right? Baki asked as the Kazekage stood to his feet. It's fine. Baki, I'm going out for a bit, he said, and Baki bowed. Yes, Gaara-san, Baki said as Gaara walked out of the room, leaving his sensei in the dark about what was going to happen. Gaara grabbed his gourd and stepped out on the platform. He saw a strange bird in the air and narrowed his eyes when he saw someone jump down in front of him. Infiltration success, Deidara said with a grin, but that was quickly shot down when he looked at Gaara. The Ichibi Jinchuriki glared at Deidara. So, I've been spotted him, Deidara said while Gaara's sand started to swirl around in a frantic manner. There are no birds like that in my desert, Gaara said while Deidara grinned. I suppose not. Well, then I'll just show you why art is an explosion, Deidara yelled out as the Kazekage of sand got ready for a fight. Back in Konoha, both Sakura and Naruto found Kakashi and were currently fighting the Jonin with everything they had, or at least Sakura was. Naruto still didn't use his sword and was in for a straight taijutsu fight with Kakashi. Get back here, Kakashi-sensei, and fight, Naruto yelled out as he chased Kakashi. The Jonin grinned and threw a kunai at the blonde, making him dodge before his field of vision was shattered. Kakashi used that opportunity to dash off, but he didn't get far before Sakura nearly punched his face as she rocketed into the ground, causing a loud tremor while Kakashi's sweat dropped. She really is like Tsunade-sama, Kakashi thought before he dodged a kick from Naruto. The blonde smiled and backflipped, which revealed a clone behind him that went for a time difference attack. Kakashi narrowed his eyes before countering the punch and kicking the clone in the stomach, making it dispel. Kakashi backed away from the two of his students and wiped his brow. Well, that's good for both of you. Your taijutsu is excellent, but now for your next lesson. Ninjutsu, Kakashi said as he went through his hand signs. Sakura and Naruto narrowed their eyes as the Jonin finished. Sakura, get back, Naruto said, and Sakura wasn't sure what the blonde was going to do, but Naruto was ready for something. The blonde did his own hand signs while the seal on his hand glowed slightly. Naruto grabbed his sword and it shined as Naruto charged at Kakashi. Naruto, what are you doing? Sakura yelled out while Tsunade, Jiraiya, and Shizen narrowed their eyes. Katan, Gokakyu no Jutsu, Kakashi yelled out, sending the blazing fireball at Naruto. The blonde grinned as his sword slammed into the fireball. The collision was intense as Sakura and Kakashi stared in awe of Naruto, slashing through the fire. Naruto continued at Kakashi, surprising the Jonin before he backflipped away. His Sharingan was working overtime to analyze what just happened to his ninjutsu. Naruto's sword shined and the blonde turned to Kakashi. His gaze was cold, but still full of some warmth. Like a Kakashi-sensei, I call that move Shin no Mai, Dance of Death. As you know, Kakashi-sensei fire is a living, breathing thing. It spreads, it consumes, and like us, it dies. I just made my sword the cause of that is all, Naruto said as Kakashi narrowed his eyes. He tried to feel the chakra around Naruto's sword, but it felt indeterminable. He had never seen something like it before anywhere. Kushina, did you teach Naruto that? Jiraiya asked, but Kushina was just as confused as the Toad Sage. No, I didn't. Where he learned it, I don't know, but it's awesome databang, Kushina said, getting excited by watching her son. Tsunade, Shizun, and Jiraiya's sweat dropped at her excitement. Meanwhile, Sakura stared at Naruto while the blonde ran at Kakashi. The copy shinobi dodged a slash from the blonde, but Naruto pivoted his foot and planted it into Kakashi's side. Kakashi winced, but didn't dwell on it long before he rebounded and landed on his feet. Not bad, Naruto. You've grown, Kakashi said before he dodged a heavy punch from Sakura, which caused a crater in the ground. Don't count me out yet, sensei, Sakura said with a grin on face. Naruto smirked at his teammate before he sighed and took his mother's stance. Well, since I have my sword out, I think I'll use it, Naruto said while Kakashi closed his eyes for a minute and smiled. They've both grown so much. Especially you, Naruto Uzumaki, Kakashi thought as he opened his eyes. Not bad for a good fight, Kakashi said before he saw two Naruto clones burst out of the trees as they charged him. Kakashi took more note of the blue sphere in their hands as the distance between him and them lessened. Udama Rasengan. The two Narutos yelled as they tried to slam the ball into Kakashi's body, but the Jonin dodged the Rasengan as he jumped into the air. What he didn't expect was Naruto to use his speed to appear above Kakashi as the blonde began to spin violently. Yuzuno Fukasu, Dai Uzumaki, Ikari, Whirlpool Revenge, Great Maelstrom Rage. Naruto yelled, and Kakashi could have sworn that even with his Sharingan, but he was seeing water dance around Naruto with his sword before the blonde dashed for him in the air as they hit the ground, causing a big explosion. Sakura covered her eyes before surveying the landscape. Kushina smiled at her son's accomplishment while the blonde appeared. He huffed with a smile on his face before he turned to see Kakashi on the water with a large slash through his flak jacket. Phew, that was close. If I had been a second off, he really wouldn't killed me with that move, Kakashi said to himself while he went through more hand signs that Sakura and Naruto couldn't make out. Suiton, Sun no Jutsu, Kakashi yelled out, creating a large water dragon and sent it at Sakura and Naruto. Both cursed as they jumped out of the way as water flooded the entire area. Naruto and Sakura narrowly escaped the water as they headed into the trees inside. It was a diversion. Kakashi had run off hiding, and they had no way of finding him. Naruto huffed as he laid on the ground next to a tree. Well, Kakashi-sensei really does live up to his reputation, Naruto said, and Sakura had to agree with him. But how are we going to beat him? Even if you've improved in nearly everything, we still can't match him, Sakura said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes. I can match him, Naruto said, and Sakura widened her eyes, but Naruto didn't leave her the time to be impressed. I just don't have the same experience that he does. If I did, then we could take him on easily, Naruto said while Sakura widened her eyes again. What training did Naruto do to become like this? So what do we do? Sakura asked, and Naruto smiled a bit. Well, let's see. My taijutsu is about equal to his thanks to my mother's training. He's better at using ninjutsu than any of us. He's smarter than Shikamaru. His sense of smell is better than Kiba's. He has the Sharingan and a lot more experience than we do. Frankly, the only thing we have more than him is your medical ninjutsu and my chakra reserves, Naruto assessed before Sakura pointed. What about your sword? Are you better than him at that? Sakura asked, and Naruto looked at his sword for a few minutes. Well, Kasan told me that Kakashi-sensei did no kenjutsu at one point. I'd say I'm better than him since we haven't seen him pick up a sword in who knows how long, Naruto said, and Sakura sighed. When you sound like that, it's like we can't win, Sakura told the blonde, but Naruto's grin got bigger. Now, I didn't say that, Sakura. I might have been a goofball when we were younger, but thanks to Ero Sennin and Ka-san, I've learned a few things, Naruto said and whispered into Sakura's ear. The pink kunoichi widened her eyes before she stood to her feet and smiled at the blonde. Naruto, you really are the #1 hyperactive, knucklehead ninja, Sakura said, and Naruto stood his feet. He quickly sheathed his sword and patted Sakura on the shoulder. Let's go get those bells, Naruto said, and Sakura nodded. Meanwhile, Hoes watching were very impressed with Naruto and Sakura. They've really learned a lot. Still think he's a genin? Jiraiya asked, and Tsunade scoffed before turning to him. Genin? The brat could be Jonin if he had the experience down. Whether he gets the bells or not, he's already the best Chunin by far, Tsunade said while Kushina shushed them. It's going to get good now, Databane, Kushina said, and everyone turned their attention back to the woods. Kakashi sighed as he rested near a tree. His outfit was worse for wear, and he was tired. The Jonin had overused a Sharingan, and he was losing chakra fast. He then went into his pouch, but shook his head. No, I can't. It's not easy to read and stop them like last time, but I'm dying to see what happens, Kakashi said as he sat in the forest. He stayed there for a few more minutes before he smelled Sakura and Naruto coming at him. Great, looks like the fight's back on, Kakashi said as Naruto came out of the trees with Sakura right behind him. Naruto charged at Kakashi and tried to punch him, but Kakashi dodged the hit and tried to hit Naruto, but the blonde grabbed his fist and held it tight while Sakura held his other hand. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at why it was like this before Naruto grinned. You Kakashi-sensei, the boss like to start cool and end things with a bang, the the blonde said, and Kakashi widened his eyes. Naruto? He wouldn't dare, Kakashi said before he heard a sound. Ka! Naruto yelled, and a massive explosion came across the forest, making Kushina smile while Jiraiya sighed. Tsunade would really have some work to do when it was all over. Naruto and Sakura walked up to a passed-out Kakashi and smiled. This was a good day indeed. 1 hour later, Kakashi groaned and rubbed his head as he came to. He had a splitting headache and turned to see Naruto and Sakura grinning at him. Kakashi checked his side and saw that the bells were gone. Naruto and Sakura held the two and smiled. That's your defeat, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said, and Sakura nodded with him. Naruto, that was a nice trick. To mask us with clones to get close to Kakashi-sensei, then have them explode. That was amazing. I can't believe you thought of that on the spot, Sakura said, and Naruto grinned while Kakashi slowly got up. Bakudon Bunshin, Explosion Clone. I never would have suspected that. Not since Itachi, anyway, Kakashi said, keeping the last part to himself. Well, I can honestly tell you that it worked out quite well, Naruto said as the others joined in. Only 'cause I taught it to you, Sochi, and you performed it magnificently, Kushina said, wrapping Naruto in a hug that made the blonde blush from his mother's touch, while Tsunade and Shizen tended to everyone's wounds. So, Kakashi, in your opinion, how did they do? Tsunade asked while Kakashi looked from Naruto to Sakura and back. They performed very well. I can honestly see their growth. Sakura is very unique and Naruto was amazing. With experience, these two will go far. I honestly think that Naruto should be Chunin mid-jonin if he had the experience, Kakashi said, and Tsunade nodded. It was just as she thought. Kushina was really training her son, but Tsunade, Kakashi, and Jiraiya were still wondering how she was back, and they would ask her and Naruto sometime. But now wasn't that time for that. Sakura, that was a marvelous job as my apprentice. You performed nicely and made me proud, Tsunade said, and Sakura bowed with her thanks. While Tsunade turned to Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto, you're still a brat, but I'm impressed with that fight. You really have been training for those 2 years. Now, based on a lot of things that I've seen, I know you're no Genin. Heck, you're almost hardly a Chunin expect for the lack of experience. So, until you gain more, I'd like to promote you from Genin to Chunin as of today. Congratulations, brat, Tsunade said, and the blonde's eyes gleamed. He then jumped up and down while everyone else smiled at him. It was then that Kushina got a gleam in her eyes before she snaked her arm around Naruto's neck. It's time to celebrate Databane. We're all going out for ramen, and Jiraiya's paying. Kushina yelled while Jiraiya widened his eyes and dropped his jaw. I'll attend that party, Tsunade said, laughing, as did everyone else in the field as Naruto looked at the starry sky. How was that, Shin? Naruto asked as he walked off the field with everyone else. Meanwhile, the Shinigami made a small appearance as he watched Naruto and the others leave. Very interesting, Naruto-sama, but you still have a lot to learn. Still, I'm decently impressed, Shin said as he disappeared from view. Still, no one knew what happened in Suna, nor how it would spread the name of Naruto Uzumaki around the entire world. Kushina woke up and rubbed her head. Everyone had stayed out late since Jiraiya treated them all to ramen, which in the end left him with barely any money at all. When Kushina had learned from Naruto how much money Jiraiya had hoarded off her son, she made it her personal mission to have Jiraiya pay back that amount to Naruto. It amazed the woman that even when he treated them, he still wasn't close to finishing his debt. The Uzumaki woman soon turned her head to see that Naruto wasn't on his side of the bed, and she frowned. It wasn't like him to get up before her, but she chalked that up to just wanting to see the sun rise in the morning. Kushina gave a slow yawn and leaned up from the bed. I wonder where Naruto-kun is, she said, and before long she got her answer when she saw the door open. The sight she saw made the woman blush as she saw Naruto come into the room shirtless while he wore a towel over his head. He was wearing some boxer shorts, so it was mostly fine, but not for Kushina. The woman wanted to avert her eyes from the completely fit body that her son had. She felt herself entranced by his form as she looked at his arm muscles as well as his chest, with his body being so much more developed. Kushina had never seen her son in such detail, since he always had some form of clothing on when they slept, but Kushina wasn't thinking about that at the moment. She figured he had just come from the shower, as the water dripping down his body was something to go by. It was probably the first time she had seen her son as more than a son at that moment. She saw a handsome man that she was sharing a bed with apparently. I've never noticed it before, but Naruto-kun is so dash. Kushina caught herself and widened her eyes. Immediately, she averted her gaze out of embarrassment and slight shame. She was his mother. This was so wrong. There was no way she could think something like this. Naruto watched his mother out of confusion for a few minutes before he walked up to her. Her sudden behavior worried him slightly, and the blonde wondered if she was all right. He might have been confused about his slightly growing affection for his mother, but he was still her son, and he figured he could still worry about her. Ka-san, are you okay? Your face is red, Naruto said, suddenly invading her space and placing his hand on her forehead, giving Kushina a frontal view of her son. The redhead mentally gulped and quickly stood to her feet, surprising Naruto slightly. Fina Naruto-kun. I'll go make breakfast now, Kushina said as she immediately grabbed her robe and wrapped it around her waist. Having done the action, she left the room as Naruto heard the rapid steps downstairs, making the blonde more confused. What's wrong with her? Naruto wondered, but he didn't dwell on it long as he sat on the bed. But the whole thing went unnoticed by Kyubi, who was grinning like mad. I knew I was right. Oh, this is going to be so interesting. I hope the brat is prepared for this, Kyubi thought before staying silent. Naruto sighed as he put on his black shirt and black pants. He opened his closet and took out his black shoes. He also covered the seal on his right arm with his wrist guards and strapped his sword to his back as he walked downstairs. Naruto saw his mother cooking in an apron, and the blonde gulped. He heard her humming a soft tune as she set the table. He smelled the breakfast she made and sat down, though. As soon as he did, his mother went silent, making the blonde nervous. Ka-san, is something bothering you? Naruto asked, and Kushina sighed. She tried to forget the imagine in her head a few minutes ago, but it was very hard. She hadn't been with anyone for 2 years, and she wondered about that. Not to mention, she also felt that she was betraying Minato by having these feelings. She had to admit that for being half his age, Naruto was a lot more fit than Minato. Plus the whisker marks made him more cute. I'm Fina Naruto-kun. Here, eat your breakfast, Kushina said as she avoided looking directly at Naruto's face. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing her son's piercing gaze on her, which Naruto was doing. He seemed genuinely concerned, but he decided to stop and eat his breakfast, which was rather more tense than pleasant. Neither Naruto nor Kushina could talk about anything that seemed of interest. Naruto, because he was concerned about his mother and wanted to know what was wrong, and Kushina for the less than motherly feelings she was starting to have for her son. After the intense breakfast, Kushina went upstairs to get dressed while Naruto sat on the couch. He thought about his mother and why she was acting like she was, but he didn't get the chance to do that long as the doorbell rang, distracting Naruto from his thoughts. The blonde got up from the couch and opened the door. He saw Jiraiya standing there and wondered why he was here. Ero-senin, what's up? Naruto asked while Jiraiya sighed and rubbed the back of his head. Well, Tsunade wants to see you and Kushina right now. She sounded pretty serious, so I think you'd better go, Jiraiya said in a serious tone, and Naruto nodded. At that time, Kushina came down the stairs in some blue jeans and red sleeveless shirt. Well, then what are we waiting for? She asked as they closed the door and walked towards the Hokage mansion. Jiraiya and Kushina weren't sure what this was about, but Naruto rubbed the seal on his hand as he had an idea of what the slug princess wanted to talk about. Hokage mansion. Naruto, Kushina, and Jiraiya came into the room to see Kakashi, Sakura, and Shizen also. Kakashi was leaning up against the wall, while Sakura and Shizen were beside Tsunade. All right, how I brought them. Now can you tell us why you're so serious? Jiraiya said, and Tsunade narrowed her eyes. Don't be so simple, Jiraiya. You know you're as curious as I am. I want to know how Kushina is alive. Not that I'm not happy to see her, but it's still an issue, Tsunade said, making Naruto mentally gulp that she confirmed his theory. Kushina seemed to understand Naruto's problem. She still remembered Naruto's talk with her about how she was alive, and while she couldn't believe it, she knew he was right. She had seen the frustration in his eyes and racked her brain with something to say. Besides, no one would believe Naruto, and not many people would want to see the Shinigami anyway. Well, I'll admit I'm curious, but sometimes it's best not to ask questions and just accept things, Jiraiya said to her. Normally, he would have been on Naruto and Kushina about it since for 2 years they never explained anything. But to him, that was their business, and they would tell him if they wanted. I understand that, Jiraiya, but I still must know. So what do the both of you know? Tsunade asked while Kakashi and Sakura showed concern that Naruto might be in trouble. Naruto was in a wreck. His contract was a lot more frustrating to have. Well, Bachan, the thing is that dash. I had left Konoha, Kushina said, interrupting Naruto. Jiraiya, Tsunade, and the others turned to her, and the redhead sighed. She looked at the ground and feigned some depression, but to everyone it was believable. Naruto figured his mother could be an actor maybe. I was told that Naruto didn't survive the extraction, and I was already sad that Minato didn't make it, so I left. I just found Naruto-kun 2 years ago in the plains of a town. I was so happy to see him, and I came back to get some answers, she said to everyone while she turned to Kakashi, who raised an eyebrow while she advanced on him. And while we're on the subject, Kakashi, please tell me what you've been teaching my son as a shinobi. Kushina asked, and Kakashi gulped. Sakura snickered and chuckled at her sensei. He really hadn't taught them much that she knew of. Teamwork and chakra control were which was quite good, but it was also a failure since Sasuke had left. I did like Minato-sensei did. He emphasized teamwork over anything, and I was teaching that to Naruto and Sakura, Kakashi said while Kushina giggled. It was more strained than anything else as she grabbed Kakashi's collar. Kakashi, my son's taijutsu, was atrocious when I taught him. He had virtually no ninjutsu techniques, and his chakra control, while quite good, could have been better. It's nice that you focused on teamwork, but no individual has skills, then teamwork is dead, Kushina said as she bonked Kakashi on the head. The Jonin winced at the pain and rubbed his head, while Kushina managed to take his orange book. And I told you to stop reading this stuff. You were too young to be reading it anyway, Kushina said, and Kakashi held his head down before a cough from Tsunade brought the woman back. Who told you that the extraction was a failure? Tsunade asked, and Kushina thought it over for a second. I don't remember. It was some doctor, but I don't remember the face anymore. It hardly matters to me anyway. I'm just happy to see my son, Kushina said with a bright smile across her face while Naruto nodded in agreement with her. They really didn't like to lie, but the situation sort of called for it, and Naruto wasn't ready to reveal his contract just yet to everyone. Tsunade and everyone else thought over her answer, and they all seemed to be okay with it, so Tsunade dropped it for now. It was then that a Chunin bursted through the door and bowed before Tsunade, interrupting everyone. Hokage-sama, urgent news from Suna. The Chunin said, and Tsunade stood at her feet while everyone else widened their eyes. What is it? She asked readily, and the Chunin gave her scroll. Tsunade grabbed it into her hands and unfurled it. She read it and narrowed her eyes while she gritted her teeth. Bachan, what's the problem? Naruto asked, and Tsunade glared at everyone in the room. It says that the Kazekage was kidnapped by Akatsuki, Tsunade said, making Naruto gasp, and so did everyone else. Gaara, the blonde, thought and gritted his teeth while everyone was still in shock over the news. It seems that Akatsuki is on the move. It also shows how strong they are if they can take the Kazekage, Jiraiya said, making Tsunade nod in agreement with him. All right, then, Team 7, this will be your first mission. I want you to go to Suna and find out all the details, then find a way to get Gaara back. Also, you must get there within 3 days, since it says that Kankuro has been poisoned by one of the members. Sakura, this will require you indefinitely, Tsunade said, and Sakura nodded. Kushina came up and grinned. I think I should go too, she said, and Tsunade narrowed her eyes. I can't do that, Kushina. You're not a shinobi of my village, so it's not wise to do so, Tsunade said while Kushina rolled her eyes. Are you kidding, Databane? Jiraiya told me about Akatsuki. Don't underestimate my skills, Tsunade. You of all people know how strong I am. If nothing else, then I'm insurance for Naruto-kun's team. Besides, it was my understanding that a team was comprised of 4 people, not 3, Kushina said, and Tsunade mentally cursed that she was right. She wanted to refute that, but without Sasuke, then the team was incomplete even if Sakura and Naruto showed good teamwork. Come on, Heim. I agree with Kushina. You could make her the replacement for Team 7. Her skills are too much of a waste to let her not do this. Besides Kakashi, she's the only one who can fight S-rank shinobi on your team. Naruto can hold them off, but he needs experience for that. Just let her go, Heim. Jiraiya said, and Tsunade growled. This was so much easier when stuff like this wasn't happening. All right, Fine. I'll grant Kushina permission. We'll go into some detail when you come back. Now get going, Tsunade said, and everyone nodded. They quickly left the room, while Tsunade massaged her temples. With Team 7, Kushina had run back to the house to change her clothes while the others were heading for the gates. They had everything they needed. Now they were waiting for Kushina to arrive. I can't believe they managed to take Gaara. We've got to hurry, Naruto said, growling while Sakura tried to calm him down, but she knew it was right. Kakashi sighed with a nod, and before long, Kushina came back. She was wearing some blue shorts and shin guard shoes while she wore a black shirt with mesh armor underneath it. She was carrying a sword on her back and ran past them. Come on, let's go. No time to lose, Databane, she said and headed into the trees. Naruto quickly followed her, and so did Kakashi and Sakura. The 4 quickly rushed through the trees, but they watched as Naruto quickly passed Kushina and started to dash off in the direction of Suna. Kakashi would have told Naruto to slow down and stay with them, but Kushina was right on his tail, and he always knew about the Uzumaki woman's talent for sensory, so they were fine. Sochi, slow down. We won't get there in a day, even with your speed and my speed. Besides, you have to remember that Kakashi and Sakura aren't as fast as us, Kushina said, and Naruto gritted his teeth. He sighed and let up on his speed enough for Kakashi and Sakura to catch up to him. Naruto, calmed down. We'll save Gaara, Sakura said, and Naruto narrowed his eyes as they all rushed through the trees. I know, but I just hate them. Akatsuki thinking they can just do that. I hate it, Naruto said, his eyes turning red. Kushina lowered her eyes when she saw that her son might have lost a good friend. Sakura and Kakashi frowned when they saw him in distress, but they all continued to run for Sunagakure. It had been over half an hour since they started running before Sakura looked at the ground. Hey guys, wait a minute. There's Temari-san, Sakura said, and everyone shot towards the ground. Temari turned around to see the 4 coming up to her and waved as they got closer to her. Hey guys, what are you doing all the way out here? She asked, smiling at them, but everyone was too serious, and she noticed that. We're on our way to Suna, Temari-san. Gaara's been kidnapped, Sakura said, and Temari widened her eyes. The silence reigned in the forest as she tried to understand Sakura's words. He's been kidnapped, Temari asked, and Sakura nodded. Also, Kankuro-san's been poisoned. We're going to Suna right now, Sakura said, and Temari nodded with them. Then what are we waiting for? She asked as she rushed off with Team 7 following her. Everyone rushed towards Suna and wasted no time and tried to get there either. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Deidara and Sasori came into a secret cavern and dropped Gaara on the ground. He was passed out from the fight he had with Deidara while the 2 Akatsuki members sat down in front of the astral projections of the other members. Jinchuriki, take down him. He was kind of a pain, Deidara said while Sasori sighed. You didn't have to bring attention to us, though. That stupid explosion nearly had ever Sunanin on us. You should be lucky that we got away, Sasori said, and Deidara waved him off. Please, art is an explosion, Sasori, my man. It's an instant effect of beauty, Deidara said, and Sasori rolled his eyes at his partner. Wrong, Deidara. Art is to be preserved for all to enjoy, Sasori said, and most of Akatsuki watched them bicker before their leader had enough. Sasori, Deidara, that's enough. We will begin the extraction of the Ichibi Jinchuriki. It will take 3 days to do, so rest up, and then we will start immediately, he said, making Deidara and Sasori nod in agreement with him. The two rested in the cave so they could replenish their chakra for the extraction process. 2 days later, Naruto, Sakura, Kakashi, Kushina, and Temari all arrived in Suna and were immediately briefed by Baki about the events. He told them how Gaara fought hard and even managed to protect the village from destruction by the Akatsuki. He also said how Kankuro followed them, but fell ill to a deadly poison that would end his life if Sakura didn't hurry. On that note, Sakura quickly assembled the medical staff of Suna and started to work on Kankuro, while she had managed to get an antidote for the poison form Suna's greenhouse. Meanwhile, Naruto, Kakashi, and Kushina were sitting in the lobby of the room waiting for Sakura's verdict. Naruto tapped his foot impatiently, and the only reason that he wasn't ranting his head off was because his mother kept calming him down enough to prevent him from doing so. To think that Kankuro went down is quite a shock, not to mention that he didn't even prove to be a challenge to them. It shows how terrifying Akatsuki is, Kakashi said, making Naruto and Kushina nod with him. It was then that they turned to see a white-haired woman next walking up to them while she squinted her eyes at him. "That's him, the white fang of Konoha," she said as she charged the Jonin. Kakashi widened his eyes, but Naruto intercepted the woman and matched her blow for blow that she would have tried to deal to Kakashi. "Hey, why are you targeting Kakashi-sensei?" Naruto asked while the woman narrowed her eyes. "Kakashi? He's not the white fang of Konoha?" the woman asked, and Naruto shook his head while Kakashi chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. That was my father. I'm sorry if I confused you," Kakashi said while the woman's brother came up behind her. "Nachan, you're mistaken. You should apologize to them," the old man said while the woman chuckled with a hoarse laugh. "Sorry about that, I was playing dumb hee-hee," she said, making Naruto, Kakashi, and Kushina look at her weirdly before the Uzumaki gasped and stood to her feet. "You're Chiyo. I remember you from one of my missions to Suna. You were the only woman who actually scolded me for something," Kushina said as Chiyo turned to her. She looked at the red hair and slim figure and also widened her eyes. "Is that the same brat I've seen? Kushina, you're still as young as ever. How have you been?" Chiyo said as she and Kushina shook hands. "I've been great. Completely revived," Kushina said with a smile, and Chiyo nodded, leaving Naruto and Kakashi in the dark about how Kushina knew the woman. "Oh, Naruto-kun, this is Chiyo, one of Suna's greatest puppet wielders during her time, and she might still be. I had a mission to do with my squad, and I encountered her. I tell you, she was no joke, Databane," Kushina said, and Chiyo chuckled.